put a bit of other stuff you can snort and whatever else that you like, just to give you really a lot of dopamine hits and feel really happy.
Yeah, I don't know if I like that statement about going to screw yourself. I think it's a bit harsh, maybe. I don't know.
It's about, what do I have to do to make sure my client is getting the results? So yes,
I have to completely respectfully disagree with that statement in every sense. Hey guys, I'm here today with Harry Sopanos, a good friend of mine from Australia, the other side of the planet. We've collaborated today to look at a video by Rob Goodwin and Dr. Sarah Zaldivar. I had some queries about it, and I was a bit concerned about the information that's being put out. So I thought I'd get Harry on to help explain some of the mechanisms and provide my own anecdote. Just my own experience, really. So we'll see how this goes, and hopefully we'll be able to help inform you guys a little bit better. So guys, I've just scrolled through, and I've looked at this little bit here, and it's one short segment of the video. I don't want to go through the whole thing because we'll be here all day, but I want to make sure that I'm going through the whole bit so people don't think that I'm taking things out of context or cherry picking what they say. So we'll continue. I'm just going to press play.
It's easier for you to just live in a world where carbohydrates are the devil, because it's easier for you to not touch it. And I agree, it is easier for people to not touch it when you do have an addiction. However, you can't live a life of fear. You have to understand the root cause of your addiction. And the problem is always that dopamine deficit that I've been talking so much about lately. Because we all have damaged our dopamine levels, our dopamine receptors over time. So now what you want to do is build it up. So we don't have so much of that fear anymore because we're athletes. When we're training hard, we've already reversed that dopamine damage. Right. And so we're not living life in that dopamine deficit where everything is a trigger, right? And so even if I have a tablespoon of honey, I'm not gonna seek it out personally. I'd rather not have that. But if I were to have it, it's not the end of my world, and I'm not gonna go off the rails, you know?
Of course not. No.
That's what.
Just have a bit of Tory, just calm yourself down.
Get them to feel empowered, raise their dopamine levels. Their baseline dopamine levels should go up, and their D2 receptors should go up. And once they get there, we still want to not overdo it with addictive foods, but at the same time, we're no longer living in fear from like, oh my gosh, I touched a carb and now I'm going to go all out. You know, this all or nothing thinking. Yeah. Yeah,
there are some out there that, you know, based on their history, based on their background, if they have some carbohydrate matter, then they're going to go off on a carb bender, and you're going to find them in an alley somewhere covered in powdered sugar 3 hours later.
Right.
I get that. But, you know, other examples far outweigh those in my world that, like, for instance, I'm working with this client now, and she was working with another coach, and she's competing at a very high level. And her former coach basically said, under no circumstances whatsoever are you to have any carbohydrate at all. And basically, that's what her coach's entire ideology and persona is built upon, which is unfair to the client, because this particular client, if you're going to go on a competition stage, there is a point in that process right prior to you standing on stage where the influx of some carbohydrate is going to be absolutely necessary in order for you to present the best possible version of yourself on stage to be judged against your competitors that you're competing against.
To fill out, right? To get that pumped.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, I've got some objections to this. So my last show, I tried to fill out with carbohydrates. And I'm not talking about thousands of grams of carbs like I would in the off season 5 years ago. I'm talking like 200 grams or something. But because I wasn't having those carbohydrates within my diet leading up to the show, I actually had like a bit of distension. So I actually started to hold water. So my look was actually worse. So where I was like peeled to the bone, ripped, shredded, had striations through my obliques, like the side of my abs and stuff, the week prior, when I did like a mild, modest carb up by bodybuilding standards, I actually looked worse. So for me, it was actually a detriment to my physique. Can you speak on that at all?
Well, if they're already doing occasionally carbs here and there, and potentially, you know, they're in either a low grade Randall cycle activation or not, and sort of switch between the things, they may have a certain composition, and then when they get close to competition where they're actually cutting and they've actually got to there, and then they just take a small amount, they may see a slight supposed benefit. And it probably happens more in women than men in that regard. But is it the ideal way to go about it? I would say it'd be a much smarter way to approach it from a low carb state right through, and you'll get a better effect. So, I mean, I know how bodybuilders and people that actually do a lot of this sort of stuff, they're actually forced to play around with diuretics and all sorts of things to try and get the right thing. So they take a bit too much carb, they get too much, what you're talking about, the bloating effect, and then you've got to take a diuretic to try and get rid of that excess amount. So you've got a bit of volume, but at the same time you don't feel bloated, and you're not bloated in that midsection, which then looks very unnatural like muscular fat. So people do play around with all that sort of stuff. I understand when it comes to competition, it's ferocious and all that, and people are going to play around, and certain things may slightly work for them. But is it required? Probably not. Because you look back in history, there were a number of bodybuilders who were doing steak and eggs, and that's all they were doing, and they had brilliant bodies, because they also had, and I remember one guy, he was consuming a lot of raw meat and probably getting a lot more taurine than others. So regulating the fluids and the actual, you tend to actually hold on to, you tend to prevent, it has a good anti-dehydration effect as well by taking taurine. It sort of maintains a much better electrolyte and fluid sort of homeostasis. So you end up getting that better look. Now, they wouldn't have known about taurine, all the benefits, how that sort of works. But people that do it the right way and actually include it, it's not just being able to train for longer, because it's reducing oxidative stress and you're getting those sort of benefits, but at the same time, and reducing lactate levels as well. But at the same time, it actually is improving the homeostasis and the management of fluids and ions, that means the electrolytes, in the body. Something with a lot of bodybuilders struggle with. They're using diuretics, they're losing too many electrolytes, or and they have to put them back, and it's a mess trying to manage things. Now that creates a lot of stress in itself, and that excess stress can affect the hormonal system and cause other derangements, and then people take more supplements, or they take other, artificial sort of hormone replacements, or they take all sorts of things, or peptides, trying to manage all these symptoms and all these effects that they're creating, when if they just took out the carbs and seriously did it in the proper way, they probably wouldn't have these issues to a large extent. So I find that people that actually focus on better homeostasis of the body actually get better results long term.
Yeah, I think a lot of it is down to stress as well. Like, as much as we can say, put this food in our body and it'll provide this outcome. Well, if that food is providing some kind of biological, I don't know what it is, hormonal response, a stress, for example, yeah, you can hold water, you can look worse. I've seen people look great the day before a show. All of a sudden they have a cheeseburger and they look drastically worse because they've got anxiety, because they think, well, maybe I shouldn't have eaten that. And everyone in bodybuilding, as you kind of said, like, everyone's trying to be drastic and extreme and push the boundaries.
Exactly.
And if you're doing that, 9 times out of 10, your body's going to backfire because you're not used to it. You're not used to that food.
Look at yourself. You've been carnivore now for quite some time, and your body composition is quite stable. That's less stressful on the body. It's way healthier. And also with some of the actual smart elements that you're actually including in your, with the taurine and some of the other supplements that you're including, you're actually enhancing the ability to increase protein synthesis and also enhance the improvements of your cellular function, your mitochondria and stuff like that. By putting in high deuterium foods, you're actually doing a deleterious thing in the long run. And in the long run, you're not going to last in this competition. because you're going to do far more cellular damage. If you do less cellular damage, you're going to last longer in this field. So you have to take also that long-term approach. Everybody wants the quick fame, the quick pill, the quick solution, the quick everything. And I think this is where some of this thinking comes from. It comes from not only from a reductionist, mindset, but it also comes from this mindset, I want it now. And, in the modern world, unlike back in the golden era and all that, there's a lot of things you can actually take to try and manipulate things and hope for the best. But it's creating a lot of cellular stress and a lot of problems. And it's, probably one reason why bodybuilders now have a shorter lifespan than they had in the past.
Certainly.
And yeah, it's a waste.
Yeah, I mean, what we're kind of talking about, I'm sure, as we progress through this video is, in principle, this is what the optimal diet is, roughly. These are some useful biohacks we can sort of implement. And obviously, they're going to be to varying degrees based on necessity. There's someone like myself with autistic spectrum disorder, health issues in the past, spine problems, I don't know, probably mitochondrial dysfunction from years of damaging my body, mononucleosis twice. A lot of this stuff just won't apply to me. I'm going to prefer to take the more health conscious route.
Exactly. Yeah. And this is the other thing is that people don't realize is that obviously he's also dealing with people who are in that sort of middle age, but even now, even younger people have basically had years and years of derangements, the Pottinger's cat syndrome where multiple generations and damage and all that to mitochondria, because of inappropriate diets and what the mother's consuming and breastfeeding and what she's passing on and all that, that's causing far more issues in younger people. And obviously even young adults now are getting cancer at much earlier ages, getting all sorts of health problems. So you've got more mitochondrial damage. Obviously, if you've got mitochondrial damage, then that extra little carb may give you that little extra oomph because you're fermenting it. Because you've only got this level of mitochondrial density to basically for oxidative phosphorylation to use to generate ADP. And if you can't generate enough ATP, some of those substrates are going to be used for fermentation to derive some level of energy. And so you may feel a bit better. But that is sort of a sign also that you've got some problem in energy production. Because if you've got good mitochondrial health, you should feel pretty good in a low carb state. And if you're not feeling very good in a low carb state, you've got possibly some level of mitochondrial damage. And there are tests you can do, biopsies and other things to find that at. And there you sort of then have to approach things by deuterium depleting, using taurine to sort of reduce the oxidative stress and heal, increase melatonin into the mitochondria, that is, to basically heal the actual mitochondria themselves, to improve energy production and improve the way people feel and heal much better. If they're not healing fast, I usually go, if you're young and you're not healing fast, there's some sort of problem, the underlying problem here. Because that's not normal. Younger people used to heal quite fast in comparison to today. So there are issues there. And I think most people are just under the car, but people are to find sort of quantum biology, all these sort of areas of deuterium and stuff like that, light and everything else, as difficult to understand. So I try to make it as straightforward and as simplistic as possible for most people. That's why I used to use scientific terminology in the past. In my earlier videos, I sort of have stopped doing it because I don't see the value. I'm trying to explain from a systems analysis how things work, how a system works, and it's all its parts and all that, and how certain parts can be compromised. and they can have ramifications in the way you feel. Oh, I don't feel as energetic as I felt 20 years ago. Well, what's the state of your mitochondria? So I'm doing all this excessive work and I've lost rapid weight and I've released a whole lot of deuterium into my body from stored fat that I've reduced, and now I've got some damage and I feel, stiff, because more in collagen, because it actually stiffens the collagen and the bones. So if you get too much, you get more stiffness. And people say, I'm getting these sort of funny symptoms and all that. And I've talked to other people, one naturopath recently who had me on his channel, and we sort of went through this sort of stuff and how he felt. And he goes, oh, is that what happened to me? I said, that's exactly right. So, and with a lot of bodybuilders doing these cuts and all that and having a certain level of deuterium foods in their diet for some time, they may be causing these other problems without realizing. And then people say, oh, just throw in a couple of carbs, they'll fix you. Just ferment a bit of mass to get you that extra energy, because you've stuffed your mitochondria from all the inappropriate things you've done for the last decade or two. So this is the problem when people have they don't have a deep understanding of the physiology and what is involved and all the nuancing and stuff like that. You don't need to. I think most of my subscribers understand these sort of things. I keep it fairly simple in my language. But the problem is a lot of these so-called experts don't. And so their solutions are contraindicated solutions because they've got nothing else to give people. And so, here, have a carb. Why don't you investigate a bit deeper?
Yeah, I mean, would it be fair to say that applying this approach is like kicking a can along the street rather than just putting the can in the bin? Because eventually you're going to keep kicking it and kicking it and kicking it.
Yeah. You're not solving the underlying issues that person may have, and you may be exacerbating them long term.
Okay.
And so this is where I do have a problem with people, and then people who actually claim or criticize people for being strictless to the purity, so-called, of science, and and being rigorous, like Barkay, people like that. I consider myself in that sort of league, probably not as strict as Bart, but trying to get a bit more stricter. Need to keep an eye on Ted, because I could upset Ted and I could be in trouble otherwise. But I think there's a bit of that as well. And she made a comment later on. You've heard it, a bit of a snipe there. And I think that we have looked at the evidence. We've looked at the archaeological evidence, the N15 data. We've looked at a lot of this sort of stuff. Somebody in a glacial period running after a big mammoth and killing it, that required a lot of physical ability and strength and all that. These are not weak people. These are really robust, strong, like the Maasai or like the Samburu people like that. And they are not looking around, where's my little fructose sweet thing to take to get me going and keep me going? No, these people are powered on fat. And they are performing at very high level, in comparison. So in many cases, like I've talked about in the past, the North American Plain Indians, running ahead of buffalo. First of all, they weren't quite tall because of the foods that they ate, but also they would have had to be running faster than Usain Bolt in order to be able to stay ahead of the actual buffalo, because they are about the similar speed to him. So we're talking about performance, and people, white men saw this happening at the time. So they recorded it. So it's not something that was made up, and these people also represented to Lincoln, some of the Plain Indians, and they towered over him, and he was well over 6 foot himself. So species-appropriate diet, really makes strong, robust people that can do incredible things. That's what the history has shown. Look at the Maasai, how incredible. They are feared within their region. Even the lions fear them when they see they pack and go. They move on. That's respect.
Yeah, these are tough guys. I don't think I could take down a woolly mammoth, even with 50 of me. I don't think. I probably think I'd probably get trampled on.
Yeah, we modern people just don't actually cut are not at that level. So when I hear people saying, I want to really get at the top of the level, I'm going, well, you're not going to do that with this current sort of thinking that exists out there.
Okay.
And so what do people do? They succumb to taking contraindicated medications, steroids, insulin, all these sort of things. And in the end, what they do is they cause themselves a lot of health problems and early death, because that's, unlike the old bodybuilders that were around in their 80s and 90s and onwards, a lot of the ones nowadays are dropping dead at a much younger age, 30s and 40s. It's horrifying what's happening out there, all for the fame.
Seems to be true.
And I'm saying and when I hear people being, you could say, comfortable promoting contraindicated approaches, I turn around and say, well, look at the results of your field. What's happening in it? And you, Jonathan, are a light in this darkness within this sports, because you understand and you realize it can be done better. Your clients can get better composition, they can get better performance and all that without absolutely trashing their long-term health. So
yeah, the big guys,
you're an angel, mate, in this profession.
Hardly, Harry, but I'll take it. Yes, it's like the big guys, It's funny because when they drop down from their off-season heaviest weight down to their competition weight, they can drop like 60, 70, 80 pounds sometimes. Meanwhile, when they're in the off-season, they struggle to walk upstairs because they can't breathe. They constantly smell. They have to wear CPAP masks because they can't breathe at night. And I'm like, you're putting your body through all this extra weight for no reason. It's just, inflammatory. Obviously, the carbohydrates will pump up your weight artificially. But it's not real mass. Carbohydrates don't create muscle,
water. It's water retention. And that's actually causing a lot of oxidative stress and pressure, blood pressure as well. There's another reason why the heart issues, that are there, where I'm going, guys, you're killing yourselves. You are killing yourselves. And is it all worth it? And I can't understand how some of the monstrosities out there are actually getting awards. As far as I'm concerned, they're actually injecting into certain muscle tissues insulin to cause these unusual growths that are happening. That is not healthy. That is what is also driving some of this early death.
I'm sure it is, yeah.
I think the whole field has sort of gone off the rails. It's lost the perspective. If they want to basically create, a human Tonka truck, I think they've lost perspective completely.
Sure, yeah. Well, continue.
And it's the reason. And it's the reason why I'll tell you. It's the reason why that field is declining in popularity. If you look at bodybuilding, it actually is declining in popularity because people don't want to look like that. They don't want to identify with monstrosities. And unfortunately, the people in the profession, because it's become so ideological and it's driven by this sort of, really warped body composition thinking, they're creating these monstrosities and they're awarding them and encouraging them. It's a bit like in the old days, you could say, how you look at Marilyn Monroe, beautiful woman, and then you look at basically these coat hangers. They're encouraging the anorexic, very unhealthy sort of look in the model industry. I mean, now they've gone woke in the other way, which is completely promoting unhealthy sort of body composition. Yeah. But, even that was very unhealthy, where Marilyn Monroe was a beautiful woman, beautiful, the way she was. And she actually enjoyed quite a bit of meat. She used to enjoy meat. It was one of
meat
her,
and alcohol, I think it was.
Yeah, it was actually, to be more precise.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah. Probably the alcohol was a bad part, and some of the drugs, but the meat part was the good thing that she actually did She was very far more carnivorous than many other models of her era, and that probably gave her a lot of advantages in the beautiful composition that she had as a woman. Women back then that ate actually more meat in the 60s and 50s, they looked beautiful, absolutely beautiful composition and all that. You look at the old images, videos and stuff like that, and you just say, God, in comparison with today's people, it's just night and day. Completely not a comparison. And back then, because we lacked refrigeration and we couldn't store carbohydrates all year round, and most of the carbs that we had, we used to ferment and actually put in jars, and we actually had, they were very much a good probiotic or whatever, gherkins, all these sort of things, the way we preserve things. You ended up with people that they didn't have all year round massive amounts of fructose or massive amounts of carbohydrates. It was mostly dairy and meat with some carbohydrates. It's like 2/3 animal food. And I've done actually, the Loma Linda one as well, where Gundry actually admits where he actually saw the dietary, because he actually worked in their hospital in Loma Linda as a cardiologist, and he actually saw the actual dietary document. 50% of it was basically made up of dairy.
Oh, wow.
You had fish and eggs. That's the blue zone. It's basically a 2/3 carnivore diet, highly carnivorous vegetarian diet. Okay, so it's and when you look at the research, the way they actually deliberately misled, and Bart's gone through that, actually showed once you take away the adjustments, which is the fabrication, you see it's the inverse. People that consumed more animal foods, they lived longer. We see it amongst the Maasai, centenarians. We see it amongst most other populations. The people of the Nagoya Peninsula, the cowboys. What do you think they're eating? The cows that they basically herd, or basically some plant? Give us a break. It's a semi-arid region, the whole peninsula. Before the roads came in, do you think there were any supermarkets there, or any of the stuff that is now there for the tourists? No. They were eating basically whatever. They may have had a bit of seasonal fruit. There's a fruit tree there that grows. It's quite popular. That's about it.
Yeah.
The rest of the year, other than probably a couple of weeks, in the season, they got a bit. The rest of the year is pretty much you're on animal foods mostly, and dairy and meat. Same thing for the Icarians, who are pastoralists in the mountains. Same on most of the islands. It was all goats. They're rocky. The outcrops of volcanoes. Not much else grows, So you're living with four-legged creatures, and usually it's goats because they can walk up mountainsides far better than any other animal. And so that is the actual main, animal that they use, and they have a bit of pork. So when you look at all this, you realise there's a lot of misinformation, a lot of nonsense. Mary Ruddock, when she went to there, she was a vegetarian at the time. She actually went and did some research on the island of Ikaria and realised, one, she went to a restaurant in the sort of the mountain areas where the people live longest, where they had all these tombstones of centenarians, and the old lady in this restaurant, she was serving different organ meat dishes and stuff like that, and a whole lot of other things, and she goes, it's not a vegetarian diet these people are on. And then she looked into the research and realised that the whole research paper was actually fabrication. It did not include dairy. It did not include any of the other animal foods or whatever. It only included plants and meat. That was it. So, and meat in Greek translates as kareas, and kareas we believe is beef. And so they put, we only have occasional as a treat when it comes in from the mainland. But otherwise it's all goat and all that. So even the translation, the cultural element caused a confusion. So it ended up, they only answered the vegetable stuff primarily, and obviously it looked like they were actually under eating vegetables. So how do they reproduce and stay? but this is the sort of narrative. Exactly. It got translated from the Athens University to the Greek, and obviously they look at the word meat. They translate it to karaos. Karaos means beef in Greek, and so and this is the problem. There's the cultural element as well that can, after the Second World War, looking at the region of a couple of regions around the world, in particular the Okinawans, most of the pork was killed off because of the war. People were on starvation food. So what did they record? What the starvation food they were consuming? That wasn't their regular diet. If anybody looked into the culture, they would have seen that they venerate the pig, and every single meal has pork in it. As they say, the Okinawans have a saying, we start the day with pork, we end the day with pork. So it's pork dishes with some vegetables. It's not a whole lot of sweet potatoes. That's nonsense. And then on top of that, they're quite physically active, and they undereat 80%. So they're not engaging in the Randall cycle anyway.
Yeah.
So when you take all these things into consideration, but they're also shorter because they're not getting enough, protein. So, there's a lot of nuancing when you look at these things. Unfortunately, people ignore looking comprehensively at things because they've got agendas that they want to push for whatever reason. And unfortunately, we're living the consequences of those agendas, where today's diet is about 70% carbohydrate centric, and people are very, very sick. And encouraging people to consume more isn't a good idea in my book.
Yeah.
Anyway,
yeah, I get behind that. Yeah, we'll continue. We're going to upset all the viewers. We get to the spicy stuff now, I think.
That's it.
There we go.
There is a very, very specific strategy to that. I do it with my clients who are going to have a photo shoot, who are going to go to a family reunion, I have a client who's going to Vegas for a week, and on this one specific day, he's going to this pool party, and he wants to be absolutely jack ripped and amazing when he walks out onto that pool deck, and why not? So I have everything structured just right for him, to where when he walks out on the deck of that pool at that hotel, every eye is going to turn to him, and it's his time to shine, and good for him. The guy's 47 years old. Good for him. He's going to be absolutely shredded.
Wow.
The problem is this competitor that I'm working with, I'm working the program for her. It's not about me. It's not about my ideology. It's about what can I do to make sure that she thrives and has her moment. Where her former coach, it was about the coach. It was about my ideology. I do everything with fat and no carbs. Well, good for you. That's fantastic.
Hold on. He's arguing the point. He wants her to thrive. So, let's give her contraindicated food high in deuterium. Yeah, you'll thrive long term. So it's all about the short term dopamine hit and, feelings. So he's selling feelings. Anybody can do that. I can give you, certain types of drugs.
Harry, be my coach and put a bag of Skittles in my diet for a week.
That's it.
I'll thank you for it. It'd be great.
I'll put a.
I don't know. Yeah, I guess it's like. I don't know. I don't think there's big changes you can make to someone's physique unless they're in contest shape through just doing something on a certain day. I think it can be a bit less bloated, not eat as much food, or be more pumped in a t-shirt and eat more food. That's about as far as it goes in terms of,
Jonathan, tell the boys and girls what happens when people actually get very severely ripped. Like this guy. What happens right after?
Yeah. Well, testosterone goes to pot. You can't get it up if you've got girlfriend or boyfriend. Your skin goes dry. You can't sit on anything because your bum hurts. You can't walk anywhere or walk very far because your feet hurt. Everything hurts. So if you lean down and you're next to your partner and she's like put her arm on your shoulder or something, that hurts. Main thing's pain, fatigue. Fatigue's a big one. I can think of about 50 times pre-contest in the past where I'd fall asleep on the gym floor. So I'll be
in order
doing
to
my
feel
crunches.
good, in order to feel good after that, what do they do?
Oh, they're doing a carb binge. You know, pretty much a carb binge. So it's rice and honey and syrup and cookies and stuff, you know.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes. And the thing is that he's saying that he wants to do the best for her or him or whoever his clients are. Well, the best would be to basically explain to them the ramifications of going too lean. Fine for a bit of competition, but also when you do competition, you go too lean. Coming out of competition, what you should be doing is going into increasing your fat intake, because that's not going to derange you. What it will do is it'll actually, over time, because what happens with the chylomicrons when energy, if you're going to the excess level, you're just going to increase slightly your body fat. Yeah. And then you're going to normalize your hormones.
Yeah, it's a perfect opportunity to get in a shed load of deuterium. You know, if you're that way, that minded, you know, if you say, I'm going to come off my diet, I'm going to eat loads of cookies and stuff. Well, activating the Randall cycle is going to be the quickest way to get fat, but not the healthiest way. You know, your blood pressure will increase dramatically because your body weight will increase exponentially where it's meant to be. So if you do it with fat, like you were saying, it will just increase gradually, pretty much. Yeah, I was just saying, if you increase your fat intake, then your body fat will gradually go up, but you don't get the same fluctuations you'd have if you add in the carbohydrates as well, because that, like we said earlier, increases water weight. Then your body has to flush around the blood that much more to get around the extra 20 pounds you're holding, rather than the extra, say, 5-10 pounds.
Exactly. And that's the thing. And you can actually then sustain a better body composition, a healthier body composition for most of the year, cut, and also your cut isn't as severe. So it isn't as stressful on the body, as severe, as complicated. All you're doing is just basically increasing slightly the protein. Initially, you up the fat in order to get that higher metabolic rate effect, you know, a bit like the priming effect that, you know, Bart's done in the past and stuff like that. And so the body goes, oh, this person's taking in far more food mass. Oh, we better ramp up the our basal metabolic rate. And that's what the body does. And then you do the cut, and then you drop, and you time it. And you know how to do that. You time it up to competition day. You turn up and you go, I look like $1 million. And then right after that, you go back onto eating the indicated species appropriate foods, slightly at a higher amount in order to basically increase. So we actually go to a slightly, the 1.8 sort of grams for protein in order to basically maintain our muscularity, because we're not training as hard. And what we're trying to do is trying to push up the amount of, you know, increasing, putting a bit of, you know, stored energy back onto us in order to improve our hormones and all that and feel better, and, you know, and then get back into the training until the next competition. And so we're not going through these excessively extremes ups and downs and really causing ourselves a lot of derangements and a lot of pain and difficulty, you know. So for all these so-called, you know, wee bad purists, it seems like we've got a better strategy than some of these so-called innovators. Carb spiking now is called an innovation.
Carb loading.
Yeah, exactly.
Loading.
It's an innovation, Jonathan.
Yeah. I mean, we're speaking just earlier about the study that you identified with endurance athletes. Did you want to mention that at all?
This study is in the Journal of Physiology, and it was published around the 2016. Gluconeogenesis during endurance exercise in cyclists. habituated to a long-term low carbohydrate, high fat diet. So these people are fat adapted. Our Timothy D. Noakes, so we know from the University of Cape Town, Newland, South Africa. So Timothy Noakes is one of the authors. Just so we cover that point. And I'll just go right down, because we're not going to cover the whole study. People can read it after. We'll put a link
I'll
up.
link it in the show notes so you guys don't think we're just putting something on the screen
For
then.
it.
Not detailing it.
Exactly. Oops. So just the funding was the National Research Foundation of South Africa. So it's government funding. So there's, they're not pushing anybody's agenda in that regards. So they cover all that. He covers his, because there's an Oak Foundation. So he has to basically provide that as well. But this is the important thing. In the summary conclusion, and I'll actually go to the graph after that, although there were profound differences in whole body fat and carbohydrate oxidation rates between fasted athletes on either low carb, high fat or mixed macro diets, we found no difference in the rate of total gluconeogenesis at rest or during exercise. That's really important, because these people say in order to get, we need a bit of extra glucose. We need a bit of, no, we don't. Oops. And on the rate of gluconeogenesis, hepatic muscle glycogenolysis relative to total carbohydrate oxidation. So obviously, breaking down glycogen in the muscles for glucose, to provide glucose to oxidize it. And that's the liver stuff. So the liver stuff in the mixed one is slightly higher. But if you see the gluconeogenesis, it's more or less slightly higher on the low carb, high fat. And on the mixed one, it's slightly lower, but not by much. They're very similar, more or less. Where you're getting the big spike, the big difference, is not even in the actual liver. It's actually in the muscles. Why? I need to explain why. Simple. Now, Barth explains this in the three-cog system. I've explained it before. We've got the mitochondria here. Now, the mitochondria can use a number of different substrates. They can use lactate. They can use, glucose. They can use, fat, beta oxidation. They can use, they can use ketones. The body can use a number of things in that sort of area. Then you've got the phosphocreatine, which is that shuttle, which shuttles that phosphate. Okay? And then the third cog is close to the filaments. This is the problem where people think about aerobic and anaerobic. Well, it's all aerobic. The anaerobic is at the filaments, but it's all part of one cog system. At the mitochondria, you require oxygen unless you basically really damage your mitochondria and then you're in fermentation, but that's a different thing in a cancer state and whatever. We're not talking about that. We're talking about normal physiology. You've got oxidative phosphorylation using electrons and protons to produce ATP. That's what you're doing there. And that recycled phosphate, as you release it off the ATP and then recycle the ADP in the ATPase, that little nanomotor that's actually circulating, and that phosphate goes into close to where you're actually producing that little ADP to ADP. That phosphate goes there, gets released to furnish that little bit of glucose that's required for the filaments to do the contractile activities.
Yeah.
So when you're looking at that, the gluconeogenesis is very similar. That's covering more or less the demand-driven gluconeogenesis is basically how much do I need at the filaments to do those contractile stuff. At the mitochondria, I can use fat. You know, I only need it at the filaments to be able to do those contractiles. So I need it quick. That is why I need glucose there. That is why all contractions at the filaments, as Bart would say, are glucose-based. Got it? And that's why it's identical. It doesn't matter, you know, whether you're low carb, high carb, mixed carb, you know, you're basically from Pluto food. I don't care. Your requirements at the filaments are going to be the same thing for the same level of activity. Got it? 3 cogs. The mitochondria, depending on what fuel you're using, what's going to be the one that's actually going to be the best one in terms of ATP, and it's going to create more ATP, which is going to support this work at the filaments, and at the same time provide additional to better cellular maintenance and functioning. Because remember, mitochondria move around and provide ATP to a lot of other organelles inside the cell.
Mm.
So what's going to have the biggest performance, and what is going to be on tank around your adipose to be available? You can only store so much glycogen. You can only store so much, you know, if you're in a glucose-dependent state, you're going to bonk quicker than somebody. You're going to bonk somebody on a low-carb diet than not, because the bonking is happening at the actual mitochondria. That's where it's happening. It's not happening at the filaments. It's happening at the mitochondria. That's why you get lactate going through the roof under those sort of circumstances. Got it? So that is the difference in a glucose-based type sports person and a non-glucose-based sports person. So this extra stuff here in the muscles, the amount of glucose that we've got in here, the reason for that is because part of that is for the filaments, and the rest of it is basically to running the mitochondria. And so you need less in a low carbohydrate state. That makes the difference. And that's what these people, because they're too reductionist in the way they view physiology and don't understand the way these work together, because it's a system. A reductionist can't think in terms of system. Maybe they should all be doing an engineering degree before they go and do biochemistry and physiology. They'd understand better how a body works. Unfortunately, they don't. So they actually learn things in very reductionist ways. And then they go, oh, you need this. That's why they say that. They don't say it. They say it because they can't think out of the reductionist circle. They can't see this interplay, this dynamic system. Once you understand that, this is why Bart's he's a scientist who's not recognized for his brilliance. And because he was, you know, it's like Einstein. He was pushed out of academia for the same reason. Disliked quite a bit vehemently, said you're wrong, you don't know what you're talking about, you're completely wrong. He ended up having to work at a patent office. And it was only after he published his theory of, you know, general relativity and special relativity, it's only then. And even then, there were 100 other academics that basically wrote an article condemning him and saying he's wrong and all that.
Yeah.
He got the last laugh. But, you know, when you're basically not with the herd, you're going to be basically, they're going to point the finger at you and, you know, and say, you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong. No, it's usually the herd that's wrong most of the time. People that actually are open-minded and think outside the box and are inquisitive, they tend to basically do the magic stuff. So there's people can go through this and check the first parts here so you understand the terminologies that are using it. Hepatic glycogenolysis, which is sort of the breakdown of fat. It's a sort of they call it the breakdown of glycogen, the glucose provision, is what they call GLY in this study, gluconeogenesis, and the endogenous glucose production, EGP. So just keep those things, because if you don't read that in the abstract, then as you're going down, you go, what are they meaning here? And this is a composition. Yeah. This is a composition. So the low carb, high fat people were doing something like 7% carbs, 72 fat, and 21 protein. And the mixed ones were doing 51 carbs, 33 fat, and 16 protein. So that was what it was based on. And yeah, so those are the differences. And so when you're looking at 5 or 7%, you're talking about levels that are in the round about the 25 to 30 odd grams. It's pretty low in that regard. So it's not going to play much of a role, especially if you're performing at this really high level. Absolutely pretty much irrelevant. But it's the thing that people need to understand is that the gluconeogenesis, which I've talked about before on your channel as well, and covering that it's, basically it's using water. So it's a very easy process. It doesn't require a lot of energy, hydrolysis, it's a really easy. You can check the other videos for the whole full explanation, which is about probably half an hour, so I'm not going to cover it here. Yeah. It's already been covered in a previous video where we talk about gluconeogenesis. Go and see it, go and check it out, and you'll understand fully what we're talking about.
I'll link that one below as well.
Yeah, do. So people can actually go in and check it. So that's the important. I'll just stop sharing this because it's not important. People need to realize that our bodies are smarter than some of these so-called experts and know how to use energy. Now, I would rather be putting into my body fat, which is low deuterium, than high deuterium sugar that's going to do damage to my mitochondria long term. I don't see any benefit, and I don't see anybody arguing as a benefit. You can be the best you can be, as he said. Well, no, you can't. If you're doing that sort of damage, you do that periodically multiple times over and over again, you're gonna incur some sort of cost. Simple as that. And I suspect when he went back home, he probably binged because he would have been hungry as. He got his few moments of fame. Look, my dear friends, I'm ripped. You're not. Ha ha.
Yeah, I've got a video coming out. It'll probably air before this video airs, but it's something like the dark side of bodybuilding, binge eating disorder, something like that. And I kind of feel like keeping these foods in, so like, I have a tablespoon of honey in my tea. I have an apple before the gym. It feeds that addictive behavior. From what we understand, or at least I understand from people that are well respected in, let's say, the health industry, so metabolic psychiatrists, actual researchers, they're sort of saying, well, to get the benefit, to be able to adhere to the diet best, you end up abstaining. Like, the majority of people end up abstaining to get the most benefit and not have that binge eating kind of thing. Very few people can actually successfully moderate, I find.
Yeah, exactly. And so, and that's the thing. You're driving that addiction. You're really driving that addiction, the derangement, and ultimately, people, when they're in that low carbohydrate state and they're not running that derangement continuously, they feel pretty good. You only feel great when you've been really bad and you come back to the good.
Yeah.
But when you're doing it good all the time, you get used to it. It becomes second nature. So it feels, I feel fine. But really, compared to most others, or how you felt in the past, is way better.
Yeah.
And sometimes we forget that.
It takes coming off the diet to realise.
Yeah, you have to do that. You have to do a lot of wrong things before you realise, oh God, I don't feel that great. And then you go back and you go, wow, now I remember how this feels. And then again, it's not complacency or it's not any of that. It's just, when you do things again over and over again, your body just sort of reduces this. It's not as, it's just I do it for survival. And you can see also the mentality of tribal people. They're not fixated on food like we are. Have you noticed? If you look at videos of tribal people, I've spoken to Mary Ruddock as well, and she said they're calm. They're not fixated on foods. They don't need to be shoving things down their throat every single moment of the day. Because when you're eating a species-appropriate diet, you get the right signaling. And then you don't feel the urge, I must eat. You eat when you're hungry. Otherwise, you eat less. And it's a really nice feeling when you're not stuffing down your throat a whole lot of food like we used to in the past. So I do think that the messaging that a lot of these people give is because they're pandering to a clientele that actually wants to be, I want you to do it from the way I want. So it's not in their best interest, it's in the way they feel. But their feelings may be completely wrong.
They can lie.
Most likely. Yeah, exactly. And so, obviously I'm not asking him to be a psychologist and sort of, have a session with them, so to speak, but definitely have an honest conversation. But he's unwilling to do that, and he's more interested in holding on to the clientele and pandering to their own wants, because that's really what it is, wants. It's not needs, it's wants. Needs is a real need that somebody has for their physiology to work properly. Wants is something that I want to feel better. Give me something that is not as hard and I feel better. I can make you look anorexic and thin as on a vegan diet, but is it healthy?
Yeah, exactly.
So I mean, that's the problem with that thinking. Where it leads into these dark corners for a lot of people, and derangements and future health problems.
Yeah, that's been quite informative so far. Should we look at the next?
I just want to touch on one. I just do want to touch on one point in this regard. A lot of people out there is in the carb-centric world, that is, of the bodybuilding and stuff like that, you will get people that obviously you need, in order to signal to the body and say, I need more energy to build muscularity. Remember what I was talking about, Rob Size and his client who was severely, underweight in terms of fat weight. He had lost a lot. He was too lean, and obviously the proteins that he was consuming, he was using them to produce ATP, because pretty much he wasn't getting anything. Didn't have a lot of body fat on him to provide that energy, and his hormones were in the toilet. All this sort of stuff that you're aware. But also, a lot of people in that sort of space will put the argument, well, you need that sort of energy and all that. And then the same sort of people, like physiologists who are aware of this, and even some of the people in the sports will say, if you have too much energy, you sort of have to manage all these pieces of photonic energy, which is calories, in order to get it right, to avoid having too much you know, there's not enough demand for the energy that you to do things, and so you end up with too many electrons and protons, and you actually overload the electron chain, create too much reactive oxygen species, they say. Well, that's actually the Randall cycle, because most of these people are doing mixed diet. That is the definition of a Randall cycle activation, probably at a low grade, but it still is in that regard. So when you're actually doing this, yes, you are producing, let's not forget, into the Krebs cycle, you've got a receptor glutamate, comes through to alpha ketoglutarate in the Krebs cycle in order to basically furnish and produce a whole lot of amino acids that are required from the essential stuff. But at the same time, you're also putting substrates of energy into that system. And if you put too many, you're going to push up the reactive oxygen species. Yes, you will get some protein synthesis because there's leucine in the system, but at the same time, you're also inflaming yourself. And a lot of these people are confused. They go, how you require to build muscle, you need more energy. Well, that's normal, because if you don't have enough, the body's going to say, well, I don't have enough energy to basically build more tissue, so I'm going to conserve that energy. I'm not going to actually use it for that purpose. And so you have to take more in order to build more tissue. That's what bodybuilders have known for a long time. But if you take in the right sort of energy, you won't create this Randall cycle activation inflammation. And you won't have to worry about that. It's just basically these physiologists are seeing these increase in reactive oxygen species, and they go scratching their head and going, I don't know, we need this to basically get this. But on the other hand, we're also getting increase in reactive oxygen species, So as a reductionist, it's both good and bad for different things. No, there's an alternative. It's called bed oxidation. Put fat in and allow gluconeogenesis to handle the rest from, the glycerol backbone and things like, gluconeogenic amino acids like alanine, as an example, to provide the glucose that's required at the filaments. But again, reductionism, they don't understand this interaction between these three cogs. They see them as these separate parts rather than seeing them as interconnected. They work together synergistically in a systems sort of function. They are the parts of a system. And once you understand that, you understand, well, I don't need carbs to generate more reactive oxygen. What I need is pretty much fat. And if I do have a bit of extra fat in the system, because it's going to be released out of the fat cells through the signaling requirements, you're not going to get excess amount like you would from food as well. These lipids that are moving around are managing these cargo ships, are holding on to it, so you don't get this massive push into the actual, when the cell needs it, provides it, and still moves around and circulates, goes back to the liver, gets repackaged, moves around as VLDL and LDL, but it's not overloading. It's providing the energy on a demand. So on a species-appropriate diet, you're getting that without having these issues at the mitochondrial level, which people are describing, plus getting the additional energy required so you can actually get the anabolic effect at the muscle level. It's a beautiful system. People, for thousands of years, our species, that's what the N15 data shows, have been doing it this way. But obviously the crackpots viewing it in the reductionist way, they don't understand this interplay and this relationship. For them, it's confusing. We don't know why this happens, why this extra amount helps with protein synthesis, but then it's deleterious at the mitochondrial level. Well, if you weren't putting in mixed macros, you wouldn't have the problem. It's called the Randall cycle. Maybe you should ask Mr. Bart Kay to explain it to you. Anyway, I thought I'd throw that little rant, a little a jab at some of those people out there that like to have a go at Bart.
Yeah, Bart gets so much pushback for what he says.
I'll leave it at that.
I think Bart's very fair. What
does.
people don't realise is he was a university professor, fine. So imagine he's marking for a textbook for a someone's filled an exam, yes, right, no, wrong. But if you're talking about science, you're teaching someone a science degree and his channel focus is on health science. Well, if someone's incorrect, then that's deleterious to health. So, of course, he's going to want to be adamant on the mark, on point sort of thing.
He's going to be strict.
Yeah.
He definitely has that teacher strictness or academic, scientific.
I was scared shitless of him when I first met him.
I don't know. I never had that feeling, but but then probably I'm an arrogant Greek, as my friend calls me. But anyway, and nothing intimidates me.
Yeah. Okay. Here we go.
But one trying to be nice.
What you're doing isn't doing a service to your clients. Now, and along the same lines, I do have clients that can't have carbohydrates.
Who's not doing a service to their clients?
So we retool things for that specific client, and there are strategies and protocols for them as well. But it goes back to what we were talking about previously. We have to work in the best, the best for our clients based on who they are, where they've been, and what they can handle, all their individual tolerances, their background. So that's what a coach is.
Agreed.
And sometimes some of these younger people, it's more about clicks and follows than it is doing what's in the best interest of your client. And I think the fact that I've been doing this 30 years and, I know it's not about me, it's about them. That's, that's how I keep my head clear, and that's how I sleep good at night.
Love everything
Can I just say one thing
said.
in regards to what he said? If you don't mind. Now, he's making a good point there, because there are a lot of influencers on YouTube, on many other things and all that, that are just basically saying a lot of nonsense. There's no science to them. It's more anecdotes or their own opinions and stuff like that. And some of that stuff can be deleterious because it's wrong in many cases and can be a problem for people. So, if it's poorly informed, it can have, poor outcomes for people if they follow it. And obviously if somebody's young and, somebody's young, they got a very good, not deranged mitochondria. They're much better. They've got higher mitochondrial density. When they switch over to carnivore diet, they just get ripped like that, and they look pretty good. Somebody in their middle age that's had a lot of mitochondrial damage, somebody older that's had even other health-related issues or whatever, they are going to be more challenged, and they're going to require a very different approach. And obviously, some of the influencers out there that are actually promoting things in a very ignorant way, obviously also are doing a disservice to many communities and many people. Unfortunately, they're very popular and they are promoted because basically they are, in many cases, pushing the normal narratives that are popular. So, yes, I sympathise with that sentiment that he has.
Yeah.
But then I call him out and say, well, okay, that is a fair thing to state about these people. But what about you accommodating the feelings and the needs of my clients, which, clients can actually want a lot of things. What a client wants is, you're the expert, guide me. I want
teach
this,
me.
but
Teach me.
But I could be unrealistic.
Yeah.
Teach me the best way of actually getting the thing, because there is a risk when you become just a coach, like a clapping behind, that you may not give them the best service, in a sense, because the best service isn't just giving them what they think they want.
Not a cheerleader, is it? No.
Yeah, it's not a cheerleader. That's the word, exactly. He's gone from, I'm an extreme coach, you'll do it my way, and very, not authoritarian, very inflexible, and then to a cheerleader. There is a middle ground to that, where somebody is serious, puts, you could say, boundaries, and says, these are the boundaries in order to get the best results. And the reasons why these boundaries is because this is what will happen to your body long term and short term and whatever else, and explain the ramifications. That is a better approach. And that's the approach you take, Bart takes, I do as well, many, and a number of others in our community. And I think that's a better approach because it's informed by science, the best science that we've got, and our archaeological evidence, but at the same time, it also understands the human dimension part, but it neither is a cheerleader and it neither is basically just pushing fashion. It's a better approach, but it's also a harder approach to do for most people because it takes a bit more effort.
It's certainly tougher. Yeah, I mean, I get a lot of clients that are a bit younger, like myself. I'm 28. I work with a lot of people, perhaps 25 to 40, so maybe a bit younger than middle age, I'd say. A lot of them come from backgrounds of, very disordered eating, perhaps a vegetarian diet. Their guts are messed up. In which case, yes, I don't put them onto a strict carnivore diet straight away. There'll be a diet 1, diet 2, and sometimes a diet 3. I'll say, follow this for 2 weeks. Check in with me each week or what have you. See what happens. And some people are, they can transition faster. But I say to people, this is the most conservative approach. This is the reason why I do it. And every check-in, I give people the objectives to achieve, the kind of feedback I want, in terms of like how they're feeling, stuff like that. Then I work from there, and it's on a week-by-week kind of basis. Sometimes it's even more frequently than that. But the important thing is, I'm making this change for this reason. I'll explain it. It'll be well written out in a half a page, sometimes even that, just to explain to them why I've made a certain change.
But that's the approach you have to take, because that's going to get that person from point A to point B, C, D, and E. And if F is the goal, that's how they're going to get there. And you'll get less derangements. You'll get a smoother transition. And through as you're going, you'll have some feedback and you'll be able to make adjustments and stuff like that to fix issues, underlying issues that haven't been resolved and stuff like that. It could be gallbladder issues, it could be stomach acid issues, it could be all sorts of things. And those people have also this sort of baggage to deal with. And the last thing you want to be doing is just throwing them in the deep end, say swim.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, my plans, like anyone that I've worked with knows my plans are like, initially diet training plans about 6 to 8 pages long, sometimes 10, 12 pages long. Depends how much detail they need. If I'm working with someone like, I don't know, my friend Jerome, he's very well read in nutrition and exercise science. His plan will be 5 pages. If I'm working with someone who was a previous vegan who just came across my videos, it's going to be 10, 12 pages long, and it's going to be well explained, detailed, teach them the things. I give them the opportunity to also ask me questions, feedback things to me. So people might think that I'm very strict in principle. I'm like, well, yes, in principle, this is the healthiest diet to follow. This is the best exercise plan to approach with. But for your point in time, this is where you start and this is where you might progress to. So I think it's an important point to point out.
Yeah, exactly. And that's precisely how we should approach these things. It's not I think sometimes people, and it's like people come to a coach and say, well, I want to eat, by next week I want to be ripped or this or that or whatever. You can actually do it. It's very damaging to the body.
Yeah.
You can actually do it if you really want to get certain things to happen. You can. The question is, that person should then advise that person of the ramifications, the consequences, be quite clear, all that. But you can do it. There's many methods, I mean, even some of the drugs that are out there, they'll cause a lot of derangements and problems long term. Gastroparesis and all sorts of issues they can create, but that you'll lose a lot of weight very fast in a very short amount of time. So there's a lot of methods out there that can be used, but are they the best? And I think having an honest conversation with a client is really important, and not being a cheerleader, but being somebody that actually seriously wants to see the best of this person, truly for them, because sometimes they themselves may not be aware about that. And so they need somebody to sort of lay it out and give them a plan and assist them as they're going through this journey.
Yeah, completely agree. All right, should we progress to the next
Yes.
bit? Should we do the calories bit?
Yeah, definitely.
That'd be a good one.
So crazy to me. So I started posting YouTube videos just about everything that I'm interested in, and it just so happened that I was interested in the carnivore diet, and I posted a video about the Harvard study. I think I was like the first one to do a YouTube video on it, so it got a lot of views, and I gained a lot of people from that and interview requests, and so I started growing really fast that way. But somehow the label gets attached to you, like you're a carnivore doctor, which I don't mind it. I do think a carnivore diet is the optimal human diet or species specific diet. I really do think it's the best. So that's fine. But then people automatically kind of want to box you in and label you as something, and so like if I even talk about calories, it's like, it's taboo in the carnivore community to even talk about calories. 99% of my clients that come to me the vast majority of them, they don't even think they need to count calories or that calories matter or that you need a caloric deficit to lose weight. That's how crazy the discussion has been happening in the carnivore community. And people
you can stop it there for a sec.
Yeah, I've got a thing to say about this as well.
Ridiculous. I think, yeah, definitely this is a job for Ted.
I think we ought to get Ted involved. Yeah, I think I understand what she's saying in principle. Like, we can't overeat.
We're talking about a bit of photonic energy. We're talking about a bit of photonic energy. And I do have a problem with using photonic energy as a description of what's going into our bodies in that regard, because what we're, when we say that, what is, it's, pretty much electromagnetic radiation. That's what it is, that photonic energy. So it's pretty much massless, my dear. You can't actually, you cannot actually measure it, and tell me which body part actually utilizes photons to produce energy, or the filaments don't use it. Now, obviously, when there are reactions, chemical reactions, there may be photons released in the body, yes, and even at the mitochondria, but that's a different thing than actually saying that is a measurement of energy. We're not actually, our body does chemical reactions, quantum biological chemical reactions. So the enzymatic side is the actual, the non-quantum part, and the quantum part is sort of the behavior of the electrons through the redox, roll through the electron chain and through the ATPase, which is the protons. And we get some tunneling, but we're not going to go into that along the actual membrane of the electron chain, but I'm not going to cover the tunneling. That's a quantum effect. But what we're talking here, to actually produce ATP, we're using subatomic particles. That's that is where we're taking in hydrogen, and that hydrogen has a certain mass, and we know what it is. In a healthy person who can actually, the ATPase can actually rotate at 9,000 RPM, they can produce, if you're 70 kilos, they can produce 70 kilos in ATP weight, the mass of ATP, in a day. They're not producing, that amount in photons, massless, things that speeding off at the speed of light, they're actually producing from actual something with a mass. And what you actually, I noticed there's an interesting video where you show the difference between the calories and the actual mass, calorically identical, but a completely different mass. And obviously not only a different mass, but also would have a different, hormonal effect as well. Yeah. So, our bodies are not basically just some sort of energy. It's an interplay of a mass of food and a hormonal effect, and also at the mitochondrial level, a production of an energy substrate called ATP, and at the filaments, the glucose that's required for that contractile effect. And that's a mass as well of something, the amount of a small amount of glucose. So that's what we're dealing with, masses of things that are actually being utilized for chemical reactions in the body. We're not having we're not being fed by photons. So it's the wrong thing. And that is the reason why, and it's really hard. I mean, food labelings can be up to 20 or plus % out. They're completely and utterly useless. And the measuring system is very inaccurate, and then it doesn't take into consideration the hormonal effect or hormonal interactions. 20% of carbohydrates and 30% of carbohydrates with 20 or 30% of fat are going to have a completely different effect at the hormonal level and at the cellular level in terms of Randall cycle activation. You've got a lot of things interplaying in this system. And taking all these into account, where that food mass goes, whether it goes to be how it's utilized, how it's stored, where it actually circulates and all that, is a very complex interplay. But at the same time, it's easy to explain by understanding, realizing that it is a mass of stuff that's circulating through the system. And once you understand it's a mass of stuff, you go, okay, these fatty acids, this glucose and all that, that's a mass. Now, what is its composition? What is my physical activity? And what is it having an effect on my endocrine and the functioning of my cells?
Yeah.
When you have that deep understanding of the Randall cycle, like Bart has, and people like that, that is when you can actually make sense. And that's when this is my physical activity, this is the amount of protein I need to take. And then I play with how much I need for beta oxidation. Or what I'm trying to achieve. Am I trying to do a cut? So I may have to change the composition of that. So in order to support beta oxidation, it's going to be less exogenous and more endogenous rather from the fat cells. So how I play with that has to do with a lot of factors on what I'm targeting, what I'm trying to achieve, So it's a bit more complex. When you use calories, the problem is people just go, oh, I can use anything as long as I'm doing this amount. And then they disrupt their endocrine system in a number of ways, and they go, well, why isn't this working for me? And then they go, oh, you're doing it wrong. No, you're using the wrong system to measure what the body needs.
Yeah, I've had a lot of issues with counting calories in my history of bodybuilding. Like I've never found it. They say 500, calorie deficit per day every week, lose a pound a week. Well, I did that. I worked out the weight I was maintaining my body weight in the off season. So say I maintain my body weight on 4,000 calories. Say if I want to drop a pound this week, I'm going to drop it to 3,500 calories a day, 7 days a week. I might initially drop 3 or 4 pounds through like inflammation, water weight, but after that, nothing happens. The metabolic rate is adaptive. So the idea of counting calories doesn't make sense because it's a moving target. And also, you're not accounting for, okay, are you dropping those calories from protein, carbs, or fats? If you're dropping it all from carbs and fats, then yeah, you're going to be a bit leaner and it's going to be a slightly better way to measure it. But it's never going to be 100% because it's a moving target.
Yeah, exactly. And you can actually do the same thing. I mean, okay, you can throw in some carbohydrates, and what it would do is it'll lift slightly the metabolic rate and all that, and then cut back, and then you'll drop again. That's true. But you could do the same thing with fat, and it's less problematic. So why pick one against the other? Why not pick the best substrate? I mean, Bart actually just showed it recently when he was he was, stuffing himself and he was losing weight, and and part of that was, fat loss, not just, and if you'd done a bit more protein, as I suggested, you probably would have got even better, because he would have actually forced his metabolic rate even higher because of the extra protein synthesis.
Yeah,
it would be marginal, but still, it all counts. Yeah. So
I want to touch on the point.
Go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, the point Dr. Zaldivar made about people in this space saying you can eat all the calories you want or you'd have to count calories. I think that's taken out of context from what the bigger influencers are saying. So I made a video with Bart K, and Ken Berry said, we're analysing what he said in the video, it's like, you can eat all the meat and fat you want and not get fat. And I thought, not quite. As if you exceed your grams each day, whatever that happens to be, well, yeah, you'll gain fat. But the thing about the carnivore diet is, or at least the ketogenic style of eating, it's interesting because you end up not eating over what you need because your body self-regulates. You'll find you're cruising your body weight.
You just don't feel hungry.
Misinterpret what he says, and I think that's the problem.
Yeah, you just won't feel hungry, and you'll go, I need less food mass. And it just means, but you have to listen to your body. The problem is when you throw in carbohydrates, what you're doing is you're spiking that addiction. That's going to cause that continuous derangement. And then you'll need the services of these lovely people to bring you back online. I'm not claiming anything, that it's a good model. Anyway, let's move on before I say too much.
Believe that people actually believe that, like they got the basics, and it's like, no, that's why you're gaining weight on a carnivore diet when you should be losing weight, or they'll lose a little bit of weight if they had a lot of weight to lose, and then they plateau for years, and it's like you're eating nothing but meat, you're improving your health. You should also shed any excess body fat, because that's also inflammatory.
Perfect.
Can I just say something here?
Have you come across that as well?
I know what you're going to say about the...
Yeah. Look, the thing is, as she said, this person lost, fat, some weight and all that. How much deuterium did she release, or he release, into the system? How much damage?
Effect.
And if you're actually... Remember what I said earlier about the mitochondria and the amount of, healthy mitochondria, the amount we can produce as much as in our own physical weight. You put deuterium there and you bust some of those nanomotors in all those folds on both sides of the folds, because there's multiple folds, there are electron chains with ADPAs right at the base. And so in that mitochondria, there may be quite a few, and you bust one motor here, one motor there, here and there, and you reduce the amount of ATP you can produce. One, you're going to be engaging in the Randall cycle a hell of a lot earlier if you're doing mixed, which is what happens to sad diets, and that's why they balloon and get even more obese as they get older, because of, the Randall cycle activation threshold is reduced because they've got less mitochondrial efficiency, so they've got less capacity for utilizing either substrate in the mitochondria. So that's what happens. They actually have less energy as well, again, because of mitochondrial damage. So obviously you can plateau. If you've got mitochondrial damage, you'll plateau because you're releasing this deuterium, doing a bit more damage, and now you've actually caused a plateau. You're not an ancestral person. And especially because a lot of these people, what they do is they do these rapid weight losses.
Yeah.
And so they're flooding their system with a lot of deuterium. I always say to people, before you do any of this sort of stuff, what is your past diet? What does it look like? Was it high in seed oils? Because seed oils are very high in deuterium. We're talking about way over the toxic level, which is 180 parts per million. It's in the 255 at max. So it's way over 200, up to a maximum of 255 parts per million. At that threshold, you can't deuterium deplete sufficiently. The safe zone is between 100 and 130, because you do need some for your collagen and your bones for rigidity. But too much is a problem, and especially too much if it's going into the mitochondria where you're producing energy, and those, rather than in the nanomotors that are rotating at very high speed, rather than protons going through them, neutrons are going through, because that's what's in deuterium. In the nucleus, it's not one proton. There is a proton and a neutron. That is why it's double the weight. And that neutron, the more that sort of stuff ends up inside the matrix of the mitochondria, that middle part, and then pushed through the pumps, and then it comes through the little nanomotor and it slows it down, so less energy, ability to produce ATP. So if you can't use it as well, what happens? If you've got it, it'll start getting stored, has to go somewhere. That mass that you've taken in just can't stay, or it stays in the bloodstream for a while until it can be reprocessed. And that creates additional inflammation inside the bloodstream because there's too many substrates, and also increases blood pressure as well. So all these sort of things, that's, the sort of downstream effects of the Randall cycle. But that can be exacerbated because of mitochondrial damage. You're not like a Maasai who's from birth being on a low deuterium diet, stores seasonally, or a Hadza stores seasonally, fat on their body, and then uses it for a rainy day. And it usually is low deuterium fat that's coming out, and it's not going to damage the mitochondria. And the level of enzymatic capacity to basically, in the Krebs cycle, to reduce the amount of deuterium going through is able, but you get to excessive levels, you can't do it because deuterium gets pushed back into the cytosol inside the cell. But if you've got reverse Krebs cycle, that means damaged respiration, it's not working properly, what are you going to do? You're going to be pulling it, because it actually can be utilized also to produce more lactate. So there's your sort of problem. And because of lack of knowledge within the deuterium space, these sort of areas, that a lot of so-called experts are unaware, they don't realize that the reason why these people, and then they start using all these sort of strange ways to try and actually force their body to do certain things, which can be quite stressful. Some people then give up and walk away, but they haven't actually fixed their problem. They still have the problem. So I usually say to people, if you've had a lot of exposure before you start doing rapid weight loss, it's not accidental that a lot of people doing yo-yo diets and are actually damaging their mitochondria, and it's not accidental that the actual cancer rates are going through the roof. In the not too distant future, they'll be surpassing cardiovascular disease.
Yeah.
So, this is a problem, and we've even seen some low-carb people that have actually rapidly lost weight on a low-carb diet, and then a few years later have died from cancer because they've damaged their mitochondria. And they don't know how to fix them either. One, you need to deuterium deplete. Two, you need to get taurine and melatonin in the system to heal the mitochondria. And if you're not aware of these sort of things, then you're in trouble in that regard. And the way you do it, and then you have to sort of manage if somebody's on blood pressure meds with taurine in particular, and other things like that, because it also metformin, if they're on metformin, because it also lowers blood glucose. Plus, it actually lowers lactate levels because it actually increases the you could say the way the Krebs cycle works, to increasing the capacity of it by 30% to reduce lactate. So you know, I wouldn't say it inhibits the Cori cycle, but it does reduce it and force more through to be utilized for ATP synthase. But the issue here is that these people are unaware of a specific part of what's happening in the nutritional space, a thing that exists in it. The more they know about the oxidative, you know, primary, secondary oxidative products, the aldehydes of seed oils and all these sort of things, they know the glycating factors and stuff like that. They're aware of that and some of the things that you can do, but a lot of them are completely unaware of the mitochondrial damaging effects of deuterium in the food supply. Especially processed food is much higher in deuterium than normal food. So you can actually get a normal piece of, like, whether it's fruit or whether it's a carbohydrate, potato, whatever, that's going to have lower deuterium. Once you process and you reduce the water content, you're actually removing a lot of the actual some of the, you know, the lighter hydrogens, and you end up concentrating more of the heavier isotopes that remain in the processed food. And as a consequence, that, you know, that increases the deuterium threshold of processed food. So processed food itself is a problem, let alone, you know, seed oils that are going through a refinery. So it's, and there again, they're using, you know, sort of water, like, and the way it actually goes through that process, it ends up concentrating as well the amount of deuterium to basically regular hydrogen, or H1 as it's called. And these things, if you're not aware of this, which is quantum biology, if you're not aware of this, then you're doing a disservice to your clients. Now, Jonathan is well aware of this sort of stuff, so he will coach his clients in terms of, it's not a race to get ripped. What's your past exposure been? How can we manage that in order to help you, maybe with a deuterium depleted water, with a bit more fat to dilute the level, you know, get your fat up, change your fat composition within that, maybe a bit of taurine, a bit of melatonin, stuff like that, to basically, and the timing and all that sort of. So you need somebody to coach you when that. A regular couch potato just basically needs to, you know, the deuterium depleted water and the taurine, and probably they'll be fine at that level. And as long as they take it slowly, a couch potato would definitely take it slowly. It won't happen rapidly for them. It'll be a much slower process. They can sort of circumvent the more deleterious effects. But most people that want to get ripped and get into bodybuilding and doing this, or, you know, athletics or whatever, they want things quick. And they can cause themselves a lot of health problems. And we've seen it where people have just crashed, and, you know, they all happened. What was their past exposure? And then you hear these athletes got cancer the next day. What? So yeah, careful what you want, what you wish.
You'll like this anecdote, Harry. Yeah, that's perfect. Yeah, I mean, you'll like this anecdote I have with a client I'm coaching. I've been coaching him now for about a year. So he started off, I want to say, about 86 kilos, not fat by any means, maybe 15, 20% body fat. So pretty lean for a middle-aged guy. I think he's mid-40s, was actually 50 years old, sorry. And he's a military man, and he's very strict, regimented. He sticks to the plans I give him, but I give him some leeway. But he never really takes the leeway, you know. So now he's 78 kilos, and he reached his goal weight, and I said, right, to push body fat any lower, so I'd say below about 10% perhaps, you're going to have to try quite a bit harder, just because we've been doing this for quite a while now. And in that period of time, I've given him, like, not diet breaks, like off-plan, you know, junk food, but, you know, just back to baseline food level where he's not feeling like he's on any kind of diet. Anyway, in that time, he's now dropped another kilo, so he's now 77 kilos, and have increased his food intake by about 15%. Do you see what I mean? And he's actually, visibly leaner. His performance is better. So it's a moving target. That calorie thing doesn't work. We have to look at macronutrients and food mass.
And exactly, and it's that, because the body was, if it thinks it's in a sort of state of deprivation, it's going to fight it. If it thinks it's not, it's not. So it's a matter of timing. This is what you can learn from Jonathan: timing, how to do it properly. But do it properly in a species appropriate way that's not going to be harmful to your mitochondria, to your long-term health. Because if you don't do it the right way, then you're putting yourself in a very risky long-term position. And a lot of people are doing it because they want those quick results, and they're not thinking about the future consequences of their actions. And so you need people that know their shit, know what they're doing, and are doing the best thing by you. People like Bart rails against this sort of stuff, not because he wants to be mean. That's not his aim. I mean, I've had private conversations with him. It's because, and it's not because some sort of like evangelical need to be purist. He just knows that a lot of the stuff that people are putting out there have consequences to people's lives. And he finds it upsetting. It's the reason why he fought in academia with the powers that be that were trying to force a certain type of didactic curriculum on him. This is what we want you to teach. And so that's why he realized this is not the stuff that's actually going to be helpful for people. This is going to be deleterious. So he put his own career on the line. He actually resigned rather than being part of that gravy train of deceivers. So I think people need to be aware of that. And when they criticize somebody like Bart, they need to realize that he did not do it. He didn't leave academia for selfish reasons. He left academia because he was unhappy with what they were peddling and the harmful and deleterious effects it had on people's lives. He saw that. He saw it on his own health, that it affected him in earlier years, in his younger years. That's how he started doing deep dives to understand how the physiology works and what he got wrong and he was missing. And so, anyway, I just need to say that because a lot of people don't know him on a personal level. He has a persona that he actually has on YouTube, but that's not on a personal and a private situation. He's a very different person, and he's quite a comfortable person. That actually he can chill out. He can he's a very different person that he is. He comes across a bit more. How can you say?
He's more animated
animated and with a few spikes. Well, you know what I mean. It's another word for it. I just can't think of it at the moment. But that's, and sometimes he plays some eccentric roles. He's a bit eccentric in that regard, but he's a very easygoing. He's pretty laid back. He's an easy person. If you want to befriend him and have a relationship, he's an easy person to get on with and stuff like that. Some people may disagree, but that's a different conversation. But when it comes to the science, the whole purpose why I actually started his channel was for one reason only: to basically go after all the crackpot nonsense that was being peddled out there, because he was concerned that people were being given really poor information. That's why he went after them. And that's why, you know, I sort of, like yourself, gravitated towards Bart, because, you know, one, he's a good bloke, but at the same time, the material that he was putting forward is solid. Is bloody solid. It's really good stuff. You know, obviously I've been exposed to other things like deuterium and light and stuff like that, and there are other people that have also had an influence on me in terms of the archaeological side, like Michael Leeds and people like that, Laszlo Boris in some of the Hungarians when it comes to deuterium. But for me, you know, when it comes to things that I really learnt a lot from Bart would be Randall cycle and muscle energetics, the way that, you know, the system works. That was very insightful. It sort of made sense after that, because, you know, as a systems person, I looked at this system and I go, this is broken. It's all just, they're all talking about the parts, but how does this work together? Because I think from an engineering sort of mindset, how does this work together? They're all looking at the parts. And so Bart's, you know, explaining it, I go, okay, now I understand the system, because I'm a systems person. So I understood it.
Yeah. That's cool. We'll see what else they've got to say in this segment.
Oh my God. Yeah. Yeah. And the funny thing is, you know, and there are some influencers out there, for lack of a better term, I don't know what everybody wants to be called, but that are, you know, the anti-calorie thing. And their thing is, you know, it's all about, you know, effective energy in, effective energy.
Who do you think they're talking about here? I wish they just, I wish they would just say who it was, rather than, you know, I don't know. But the guy earlier that he mentioned, the
he does know you as well, but you know, so you're one of the other influence, but he's Bart. It's primarily Bart.
Yeah,
that's why I said
I think so.
Ball and bad is pretty much. I knew it was, yeah. So
yeah, he mentioned a guy earlier, another coach who his client was previous with. I think I've worked it out, and I think it's Robert Sykes. He's zero carb advocate.
yeah, okay.
He's ketogenic bodybuilder.
Yep.
I wish he'd just say like, "Oh, let's chat." So I did actually invite Rob for a chat on Instagram. I might put it up on the screen just for anyone who doesn't believe me. And he just ignored my message, and he didn't want to oblige. So this is why I've got a critique video or reaction video, whatever you want to call it. There we go. So I did extend the hand, just to be fair.
Yep.
Energy out, blah, blah, blah. Calories are inaccurate. Yes, in terms of measurement of output, it is fairly hard to have super accurate measurements from calories, the units of heat. However, let's be careful. Because
why we're wasting our time
in order to get
with such a measurement?
Louder.
There's a better way to do it.
So we can
Rob,
still
if you want to measure units of heat,
to understand
electromagnetic radiation, go right ahead, mate. Get yourself a device and actually measure as much as you like. But the rest of us
expensive
actually,
test to do, isn't it?
Exactly. But the rest of us basically really want to put in the right sort of nutrients that our body will utilize in the proper way, and listen to the signaling of our own body. You know, our own hunger, our own. You know, when you're actually on a species appropriate diet, you don't have derangements of leptin. You don't have derangements of ghrelin. You don't have derangements of these things. Actually, extra protein and calcium, if you've got those genetics of 24%, will basically will affect the incretin sort of hormones in your gut and actually improve the way it actually functions and give you the right signaling. But if you are very low on protein, and those people who've got the genetics, the 24%, are also low on calcium, they will have some derangements those incretin hormones, and then that will flow further down the track and all that. And people, what they're trying to do then is trying to throw a bit more carbs or this and that. It's just a mess in order to try, and it's a bit like the bodybuilders with the little peptides and the little injectables and whatever else, trying to manage a mess. You know, when you stick to a species appropriate diet, you don't see that problem. When you talk to Maasai, when you talk to Hadza people, and you tell them these things, they look at you strange like you came from Mars, because they don't have those experiences, guys. They don't. They do not have those experiences, you know, and they don't have a nutritionist running around behind them either. They'd probably club the person to death and probably be doing that society a service as well. Exactly, you know. So, you know, it's ridiculous. Now, obviously, in the modern era where people have had a food culture which is just disastrous for them, people are required to be able to help coach people like yourself and others that are in that space. But we need to be doing the proper coaching, not doing stuff that's, you know, going to be confusing people or giving them the wrong messaging, you know. Because before she goes, you know, I like how they flip. They go, oh, you can have a species appropriate oil, it's fantastic, but you can have a bit of cyanide, or you can have a bit of this or a bit of that. I mean, you know, these things are contraindicated. You know they are. Obviously, at a certain dose, they're more problematic than at a very low dose, but you know they're a problem, and there are better solutions. And if you don't know, get yourself better informed, is what I say to people. Learn about deuterium, learn about some of the muscle energetics, learn about these things, why you don't need, you know, any extra carbs to get that little lift. Unless you've got a mitochondrial problem, then you may notice a difference. And that means you've got a different problem, and that needs to be resolved with a different strategy. Because otherwise that person would just be getting small changes and plateauing out, being frustrated and potentially just throwing in the towel completely and not fixing the problem either. Anyway, let's continue.
Understand that we have to make sure that the numbers that we have prescribed to our clientele are accurate based on their intake and output, genetics, training style, whatever. So just because I tell a client who's, let's say that, you know, Sheila, my client, is trying to get really lean, and I say, okay, based on your training, your output, and we've tracked everything meticulously for the last 4 to 6 weeks, I have determined that I think we're in the area of 1,410 calories to put you in just the right deficit for you to free up unwanted body fat without suppressing hormonal output, which is the balance that we have to find in order for our clients to get real results. Does that mean it's exactly 1,410 calories? Maybe not. But as long as we determine that based on what she has gained or lost over the course of time, we've narrowed it down to that number and used it just as a tracking tool in order to gauge progress, then there's absolutely nothing wrong with it. I have over 100, and I read a very...
I find that a bit bizarre. He's saying like, okay, my client Sheila's on 1,410 calories, and that's what she needs to lose fat without feeling like crap, basically. How did he come to that sum of numbers? And also, if he's using, you know, whole foods diet, which I believe every nutrition coach should be advocating for, why doesn't he just say, okay, your diet to maintain your weight is, I don't know, 1 large avocado, 300 grams of 80-20 beef mince, and 2 eggs, something like that, you know? Why doesn't he just say the diet is food, gram, raw or cooked?
We've already got a measurement for the amount of protein, depending on the physical activity and all that. You're not going to... How much you put in will depend on how much you need. And that should be the basis for it. It should be based on calories. If I basically need, 1.8 grams per kilo of body weight, or I need 2 or 3 or 4 if I'm really doing intensive stuff and trying to build up a lot of muscle very rapidly. And if I'm older, I actually need more leucine, which means I need more protein to get to the threshold, the leucine threshold, in order to get the protein synthesis. It's a lot of nuancing, and there's going to be so much variability and all that. You have to work with a client to work out where the right variability and look at what is the protein synthesis rate that we're actually achieving? Are they achieving? Because you can actually see certain people, they'll go into the gym, they'll do a certain level of training, exactly the same as somebody else, and a month or two down the track, you'll notice quite a bit of difference between the two. And there's a lot of things. There's genetics, non-genetics, mitochondrial efficiency. There are so many factors. And the problem is, in many cases, there can be just the simple thing, the level of myostatin that somebody may have due to genetics. That, or somebody taking a bit of taurine to deliberately try to lower myostatin a bit and have that binding to the mTOR receptor to amplify protein synthesis as a biohack, as an example. These are some of the stuff that a lot of these people don't understand or not aware. Yeah. I do have an old video that I did ages ago showing that leucine, that really you can be in a fasted state and still achieve protein synthesis with sufficient leucine. So, and people need to realize you only need a small amount of insulin. Guys out there in the bodybuilding world, you don't need to basically be jabbing yourselves with insulin, only a small amount, in order to get the signaling for protein synthesis. It's not, and I'll give you an example. When we say, when you're in a state of fasting, your insulin to glucagon is 0.8 to 1. You've got more glucagon and less insulin, but you don't have zero insulin. In no physiological state, not even in fasting, do you have zero insulin. You still have a certain level of insulin in the system, you still have that. The sort of signaling strength, because that's what we're talking about, is going to be variable. I've even talked about fasting, how as you go through autophagy and you release aminos, material that's being recycled into the bloodstream, it actually can raise insulin signaling. And then you've got this pulsatile effect up and down. It's not a continuous autophagy, it's sort of a pulsatile. So even in a fasted state, there is the pulsatile effect. And you can even manipulate that. You can play around with that. But that's for another day, for another video. But the argument is what I'm trying to make is that a lot of these people are completely unaware of some of these things. And so when they use the calorie model, they are missing the nuancing of how to work the system in a way that's also species appropriate and is going to do less inflammatory damage to that person, and at the same time can achieve better results, long-term sustainable results. Like yourself, many other carnivore people that are actually in the bodybuilding space that don't have these binging events, and then they get in such a bad state they have to use CPAP sort of devices to basically get oxygen into their lungs. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's just crazy, the sort of stuff that's happening out there.
Yeah, it is commonplace. I think the Mr. Olympia weekend was just now. It's just the winner's been announced. That's like the biggest bodybuilding show. I wouldn't be surprised if every one of the top 20 people had a CPAP machine just to get to sleep at night. It would not surprise me at all.
Exactly. Yeah, it's crazy. They are really unhealthy people.
We'll find out where we are now.
Sheila, my client, is trying to get really output, which is the balance that we have to find in order for our clients to get real results. Does that mean it's exactly 1,410 calories? Maybe not. But as long as we determine that based on what she has gained or lost over the course of time, we've narrowed it down to that number and used it just as a tracking tool in order to gauge progress, then there's absolutely nothing wrong with it. I have over 100 clients doing some version of a program of mine, currently. All of them nearly have been given a caloric ceiling based on what their goals are. And we determine that not just with some funky calculation, but we assess and check things out over time in real time and determine how much effective energy intake based on how much output equates to a deficit. And whatever that number lands on is the number that we use for
I find this bit quite bizarre. I have no clue what Rob does for clients in terms of like plans and things. But if I just went to my clients and said, I'm not going to give you guys, if I went to one of my clients and said, I'm going to give you a caloric ceiling, they wouldn't pay me.
But what's in there?
They wouldn't pay me. What is it?
I mean, that caloric ceiling, exactly. What is it composed of? So even, it's a wrong measurement, but what is it composed of? That's going to have a completely different endocrine effect. And also, a lot of other ramifications as well that we've covered already. So it's, and as I said, I think what he does is these short-term manipulations. So we know you can actually do it. You can actually, spike people's short-term, their metabolic rate, and then do these little upcuts, these sort of things to get these little effects. But it's very stressful on the body and very problematic as well. And long-term, it's not sustainable. You end up basically like some of these bodybuilders who basically look great on the day, and then the next couple of days they look like shit, and they feel like shit. So, I mean, that's a problem.
I just wanted to shed light on this as well.
Yep.
This is, I think, the ebook or book that she's selling. Now, Rob Goodwin, in that bit we just saw, anyone that can go back and watch it, he was saying basically, I don't create some kind of funky calorie calculation measurement thing along those lines. And she was agreeing with him. Then this is her book. And the Ultimate Weight Loss Guide, How to Calculate Calories for Weight Loss. Isn't that a massive contradiction?
Yeah, I know.
Is that fair for me to say? I don't know. Like, maybe just my autistic brain. I don't know, but
I don't know, mate. I don't know. It just sounds a bit weird the way it's actually just put together.
Yeah.
It's not even clear. Okay, you're actually claiming something, but actually at the same time, I've never heard, because I've had a few videos of hers sent to me by some of my subscribers, and I've actually looked at a couple of them, but she doesn't really explain some of the details, and it's really hard to do a critique on someone if they don't really explain. They're talking in generals, and so not that it's the lack of detail which makes it impossible to work. So you can only argue that they're making the calorie argument, and you can criticize probably 99% of people on YouTube for that. But specifically for what her diet is, why, she calls, the dopamine protocol or whatever. What does it entail? What does it look like? And what is it trying to achieve? And what effects is it having on, the reward system? How's it doing it? At the end of the day, if you look at, if you're sort of giving these like a bit of a dopamine hits like we do when we play computer games or whatever, that's not a very healthy thing if we're playing with that. And if you take away that, it creates a stress effect and all that. So it's really unclear what she means. Is she reducing that? Is there something else in that program like yoga or some other sort of stuff? It's completely unclear, and she's never elaborated. I mean, she doesn't have to give details about a program, but at least elaborate where she's coming from and what she means, you know. I mean, and what research she's basing this sort of stuff, because there's a lot of stuff out there, reductionist stuff about the, you know, dopamine, serotonin, all this sort of stuff. And even for a long time, there was research that thought that certain things were driving the issues of some of these hormones. And then all of a sudden in recent times, they realized it was all just wrong, you know, just from very poor research science. So you got to be very careful with a lot of the so-called hormonal nonsense out there, and interpret it in the correct way, because you could actually end up doing something for somebody that actually tanks out some of their hormones, so to speak, and then immediately right after that, then you've got some sort of reaction to that person, and they don't really know how to sort of sort it out. And also there is the other dimension to that sort of things, which is, you're talking about certain foods and genetics that also at play. So to say that this works for everyone, does it? I'll give you an example. I had one person who left a comment, and his background is sort of Somali, and he was basically saying, look, when I have beef or that, I don't feel that fantastic, and then all of a sudden I'm eating pork, and my libido's gone through the roof. I feel fantastic and all that. And I go, yeah, because I go, well, nice, and actually, beyond having a role in, the energy production, and so does thiamine, that are both high in pork. But those two foods also have an effect on, your libido. Why? Because niacin can help balance the two, estrogen, testosterone. And thiamine can also help with the sex drive sort of thing and all that. So when he said, my background is Somali, after I said that, I asked him, what's your background? And he said, Somali. And I go, okay, you guys have been on camel's milk for years. And he said, yeah, my grandfather used to consume massive amounts of it. And I go, do you know what it's high in? Thiamine and niacin, and riboflavin as well. And I go, you need more of these. That's why you're feeling better. And that's genetics. So if you're not taking that into consideration, that guy immediately realized, oh, okay, ancestrally. That's why I always ask people, what's your ancestry? Ancestrally, that person is adapted to requiring slightly higher in order to get some of their hormones to work properly. Now, other people would go, oh, you need hormone replacement therapy, mate. You need to sort that out. When he could just basically, if he didn't, want to consume pork, he could just basically drink some camel milk and sort his problem out. And this is the problem, that while the majority of tribal people will be able to extract very easily, but populations that have got pastoral genetics are going to have some of these calcium issues, that sort of for the certain requirements for certain B vitamins and certain micronutrients in order to get their endocrine system to work properly, because that's what genetically they're adapted to. There are a number of genetic pathways. Most people are, I'm probably one of the very few people that talk about genetics in the carnivore space. I haven't come across anyone else. There may be other people, I don't know, but it's just, I did it for my own deep dive because I had MTHFR methylation issues and stuff like that. And really wanted to find out how really, and I found out that really you don't need to be using folate and all this sort of stuff and whatever. Take choline, spare folate, and you consume riboflavin-rich foods, which is usually meats and dairy, and it fixes the enzyme and it actually just normalizes it. No need for any naturopathic supplementary interventions. So if you understand your ancestry, you understand the genetic side of things, last 5,500 years of, at least for many, some even more, of domesticated adaptations have their consequences as well. And so you need to be a bit mindful of these things. People need to be in the space. That's, again, things that people are very unaware in this space. And if you're advising people, you may end up putting them on a hormone replacement therapy when they don't need to. When if they were eating more their ancestral food, they would fix the problem and they'd have top libido. So that's what I find in this space. Not only the calorie stuff, it's also the stuff, the lack of appreciation of genetic adaptation due to domestication of so yeah. Anyway, that's another little gripe that I usually throw around.
It's been highly informative so far. The users have got way more information on what they bargained for, I'm sure.
Yes.
Yeah.
Tracking only. It's absolutely still something we can use, and it can be extremely valuable because at the end of the day, if you tell a client, well, I don't want you using calories anymore because it's not accurate. We're all going to go on mass and volume. Well, most normal people are going to be like, what the fuck is that?
Right.
I'm not used to that. I've got this tracker, but I'm like, so once again, it's not about you, the trainer. It's about what do I have to do to make sure my client is getting the results. So yes.
I have to completely respectfully disagree with that statement in every sense. As a coach, your job is, one, to give them a plan, a methodology to follow that they can achieve. Fine if they're used to tracking calories. Initially, that will be easier for them to track because they can type it in their phone, use an app, what have you. But ultimately, like I said earlier, you're a teacher as well. You have to teach people the best methodology. So initially, it might be more difficult, but you sort of get them onto a diet plan where they're sort of looking, okay, we'll scratch out the calorie bit now. We'll look at the protein amounts, like you said earlier, Harry, get the protein and the fat.
Yeah.
And, I don't know.
Let's pander to their ignorance. We don't want to upset the clients. There's 100 of them, actually, or more.
100 more.
Yes, we don't want to upset them. Anyway, if that's the model he wants to approach, that's fine. That's his business. What we're doing here is we don't care what other people do. There's a lot of people that, and as Bart says, what I put down my throat, that doesn't invalidate the science. The occasional cheat that I may have with a couple of mates and a couple of drinks, that doesn't invalidate. I know it's contraindicated, but you would never hear me or Bart claiming that alcohol or some blueberries or whatever is actually indicated and is actually good for you. We may, like all, we're human, we're in a food environment which is quite problematic, and most of the time we're disciplined, but sometimes we fall off the wagon, so to speak. But at least we're honest about, we're not going to claim that something is good for you. Oh, yeah, no problems, when we know quite clearly that it has issues. Maybe at a lower threshold, but it does. We're not going to claim something is okay, because that's what a lot of these people do, in order, again, to pander to a bigger clientele or a bigger mass of people, because that's what they're doing, really. We need to remember that. And so to people like us that call them up on that and say, well, hold on, some of this stuff is contraindicated for these and these reasons, and we can back up all our statements, we will be berated as Puritans, as really, nasty and all that. When
we call
I'm not
them,
telling people how
see you
to,
next
how to
Tuesdays.
eat. Exactly. But I'm not telling people how to eat. I don't care. It's your body. At the end of the day, you will live with the consequences. You have the free will to decide what you put in your body. It's not me telling you, you're going to ignore me, you can whatever. And I've got the free will to determine what goes into my body. And if I don't do the appropriate thing and I suffer certain consequences, I've only got myself to blame, especially when I know far more than many others, So, but you will never hear me, Jonathan or Bart, and a number of other people claiming certain things are okay or whatever, or to justify. And I can see that they don't want to go straight to, this sort of stuff. They're sort of like a partial justification, partial pandering. It's sort of, at least I'll give Saladino one thing. He may have gone completely off the reservation, but at least he's got the science. He's probably got certain genetics and he's not aware of, and he's finding a bit of a cushion or a crutch from some of this stuff that he's doing, and he doesn't realize that there is another way. When I was off dairy, I was struggling with paleo. I had to abandon it. And I didn't know what exactly was in dairy that was actually, I found out later from genetic testing that it was the calcium thing. And I was getting heart palpitations and stuff like that. And he's getting the same things. And I definitely know he comes from the southern part of Italy, which is primarily Greek genetics, which is pastoral genetics. Go right back to the Homeric epics, or basically goats and sheep and stuff like that are in the... So that's part of the foundation of the dietary stuff. It's pretty much a pastoral diet in the Mediterranean. It's very rocky. Greece is 85% rocky, and Italy is just as bad. So it's pastoral, goats and sheep and stuff like that. So I know and he probably has, but he's unaware. And he was consuming a bit more dairy, and rather than fruit and all that, just to sort of raise insulin and hold on to electrolytes through the insulin effect and all that. That's all he's doing. But if he was aware of his genetics, he'd basically ameliorate that with a different approach. But he's not. Again, due to ignorance. But at least he said, this didn't work for me, I went for that. He may have been wrong why he went for that, because out of ignorance, not knowing, but at the same time, he didn't sort of flirt around it. So I can criticize Saladino for being wrong, but I do find it a bit more annoying, maybe it's me, when people skirt around things because they don't want to be, like it's avoiding to be caught out or something, I don't know what. It just seems like...
Yeah,
anyway,
I think honesty is the best policy. I think so far we've been pretty respectful. We're not challenging them as people. We're not saying they're idiots.
No.
We're just saying we disagree with the methodology they use.
I don't even think Paul Saladino's an idiot. He's a smart guy. He didn't get where he was. He was dumb, But the thing is, he's missing some knowledge, and that knowledge is basically... And also he has a training, which is a reductionist training, which tends to basically force him in this narrow ways of thinking and viewing things, and missing some of the nuancing and other elements, which if he was aware, he'd probably make different choices. Because once he would be aware of those, he'd go, okay, is that my issue? Okay, I'm going to do this. He'd make a correct choice. He's not a dumb person that would, if you know what I mean. But... Yeah. And we're not criticising these people for that. What we're criticising is that, they're very hazy about how they're going about explaining what they do, and they're very hazy about explaining what their composition of their so-called calories is, because there could be, even in some cases, Randall cycle, even low-grade Randall cycle activation issues or other things like deuterium or whatever else. And so that would give us, a bit more ability to scrutinise that regard. So, I mean, I don't know their personal life, and I don't really care about their personal life. It's their business, like my personal life is my business. But what we're discussing here is nutritional approaches that people have and the science. That's what we're criticising and nothing else. So,
yeah. Well, if I was to say one thing about Rob, I wish I had his head of hair. There we go. That's a balanced argument there.
Yes.
All right. We'll continue with the last little bit of our segment.
I'm going to meticulously make sure that the numbers that I create for my client are going to be the numbers that are going to have them in a slight energy deficit in order for them to burn fat and get lean, shredded, jacked, and ripped and amazing. The number may not be accurate, but is a number we can use to track progress. So 100%, I'm sick and tired of, if you even use the word calorie anymore, we're going to, completely tear up your card and have you, removed from the scene. I'm like, well, then go screw yourself, because I'm going to continue to do that.
Who says frequently online about tearing up your card? Yeah, I don't know if I like that statement about going to screw yourself. I think it's a bit harsh, maybe. I don't know.
It is. But again, okay. If you got a bit more protein in and you're doing quite a lot of physical activity, and your level of beta oxidation, more, you're going to be releasing more from your fat cells and all that. Yeah, that's ketogenic. You're going to lose weight. Whoopee. But that's just because you're using a massive energy from your body rather than exogenous from the outside. But, I'm in a calorie deficit. No, you're not. You're in a calorie deficit, so-called calorie deficit. It's usually that terminology comes more from the carb-centric world. And usually what happens to those people, because usually that's the sort of food that they're being fed, but less amount of glucose, what happens is they usually lose a lot of muscle mass. So, and the only reason why he probably avoids that is because he's probably putting in far more protein than they would put in people on The Biggest Loser. That's the only difference in that regard. But as I've pointed out, if you get enough leucine signaling, even in a fasted state, you can actually increase protein synthesis and still lose, more body fat. So the argument is irrelevant. The question here that we should be asking is, what's the healthiest way of actually doing that? And what's the non-healthiest way? And what are all the other nuanced elements of basically mitochondrial health, all these other things that also come into play, and people may need a managed transition and the appropriate inputs to basically achieve that. I haven't heard any of that sort of stuff. It's all pretty much, it's like a polemic. It's just, we've got calorie counters and we've got this, really? I mean, there's a lot of dodgy instruments and devices out there that basically are just, we know are ridiculous, have no real utility in the world of any, but people like to play with them or do things with them, but they're still pretty much irrelevant and garbage in the scheme of things. But so I don't get that argument. It's like he's And usually when somebody has to basically have that aggressive, oh, I'm going to, it's like he's trying to defend. It's like, as Bart says, they will sit there crowing and shouting and screaming and wanting to defend at that flag at the top of their little mountain peak. And what do they usually say in science? Science progresses one death at a time. Of one of those people that had one of the flags. Once they're out of the scheme, then people can actually progress a bit. There's less people to resist or to argue that have got influence. So it gives a bit of space for others.
Yeah.
To make sure my clients are getting the best results. It's ridiculous.
I see that a lot. The pedantics, coming from academia, there's a lot of that happening. Those are the people that never really make it big in the real life,
Right.
in the world.
Right.
You gotta have emotional intelligence, fluid intelligence. You gotta be able to see the bigger picture and use the science and the technicalities as one tool, but not the end all be all. But I do understand also certain personality types. If you're on the spectrum of like autism or Asperger's, it's harder for you to do that. You're a lot more focused on the detail. Right. You're a lot more focused on the technical.
Are we talking about Mr. K here again?
I don't know. It could be anyone. I mean, who in our space is autistic? Has been in academia.
The one that she knows is Professor K. She never. She's been on. She's been interviewed by him.
Yeah.
She knows Professor K quite well, and he's on the high functioning autistics part of the spectrum. But yeah, so, I can't think of anyone else. Can you think of anyone else, Jonathan?
That fits that bill exactly. No, I can't. There's three autistic people in the carnivore space online that I know of. One is Thomas Clark, one is myself, and one is Bart K. And Bart K is the only person that matches that description that closely.
And the only person that interviewed her as well.
I interviewed her about 10 months ago. I don't know if we talked about calories, but yeah. I've been on her channel as well. We had a good chat at one point. Yeah. This is about a year and a half ago now.
Yeah. But she did basically talk about the calorie thing did come up at the time when she was talking to Bart. So, and he was quite clear in his opinion in regards to calorie counting and the concept of calories, so that it's in an inaccurate measure. It's an approximate blunt tool.
Yeah.
But it's not the correct measure. At the end of the day, what goes in our bodies is a mass of food, and that mass of food has a certain type of macronutrient composition, and that macronutrient composition has a certain effect on the hormonal system and the way it's utilized in the body and all that. And then on the downstream side, there's sort of the genetics and the mitochondrial efficiency to be able to utilize that. So there's that side as well. So when you're looking at a system, you have to look at, what is the wear and tear, like how much damaged mitochondria do you have, all this sort of stuff, and how is that going to interplay? A lot of people don't do that. They miss a lot of that nuancing, and as a consequence, they end up in very reductionist thinking and conclusions. And that's why we get people eventually going to the repeat madness, and maybe becoming as deranged as he did at the end. Yeah. Couldn't put string a sentence, struggling. It was just awful to he wouldn't even appear in public anymore. It was just basically audio. I don't know in what a mess state he was by then, the end, but the way he sounded, very slow, struggling to put things together. Yeah, the cognitive dissonance of a very high order.
Yeah, seems that way. Let's see if there's a last little bit that she
can't
talks about.
see the bigger picture. So maybe that's a version of what's happening there. And so kind of like, I guess when I say it out loud and you have to like remember that and kind of extend grace to those people.
Yeah.
But it is important that our audience understands that calories are very much a very important element of this. This is like the number one thing that I do on day one, and I see consistent weight loss in all of my clients. Like clockwork,
Right.
it works every single time.
Yep.
It's just basic math.
100%.
I strongly disagree with that statement, and I've had
No,
the
nothing
exact
to do-
opposite experience.
No, yeah, exactly. Nothing to do with calories. Yeah, absolutely nothing to do with calories. As I said earlier, there's a lot of nuancing in that. But in the end of the day, if you put somebody in not a calorie deficit, because you're not in a calorie deficit, because you can only be in a calorie deficit, what they call a calorie deficit on a carbohydrate centric, and usually what it is nutrient deprivation. You've got high insulin due to the carbs. You can't access your fat tissues because of the hormone sensitive lipase. And as a consequence, what happens if you don't put enough in? Your metabolic rate drops. That's what happens. And you tank. Your hormones tank, a lot of things tank. What do you think most sad dieters have a whole lot of hormonal and all sorts of problems? You think the carbs are helping? No, they're not. In that sort of deranged state. People that basically lose fat mass from their body is because they're in ketosis. You know, insulin's much lower. And as a consequence, they can release, fat into the bloodstream because the body's going, well, I need a source of energy, like those athletes. They weren't getting much from any other source. So what went up? Beta oxidation at the mitochondrial level.
You had to. Yeah.
Well, what else? So, gluconeogenesis was consistent because the requirements of the filaments were the same. The only other part that was actually different, because since they were taking enough exogenous, the requirements, that additional requirements, for glycolysis, it was what it is, what they were getting. And that's the thing that people don't really understand. That's where the plateaus come out and all that. But if you've got relatively healthy mitochondria, even if a bit extra comes out, you can actually end up with uncoupled mitochondria, and you can radiate that away as heat. And the funny thing is, the same thing happens. AMPK goes up, all this, which is AMPK. Obviously, they call it catabolic, but really, we're never in real complete catabolism or anabolism. Just to get that out there, we're in this. So most people
gradient almost.
Yeah, it's a gradient. Most people think catabolism, anabolism. It's amphipolism, which is this sort of state, because you can still break down fatty acid, triglycerides and all that, and that is considered a sort of catabolic. And at the same time, you can build up, and that's an anabolic. These things are happening at the same time, and the gradient can vary. And there is some relationship between the insulin to glucagon ratio in that, but even that is not a very accurate thing, because it's signaling. I know some people have talked about it, but I consider that nonsense, because you can still get higher insulin, lower glucagon, and still have like a lot of vegans and get a lot of catabolism, even though your insulin is slightly higher than your, like a potato diet, your insulin to glucagon ratio is going to be 4-1.
Yeah.
Still get catabolism in that sort of state because you're not engaging the Randall cycle. And in that state, also AMPK goes up and uncoupling of mitochondria happens as well. Some people think that, but the deleterious side is that you're putting more deuterium through the system and that you will pay for it later on. Plus, you're creating a whole lot of nutrient deficiencies just because you're not engaging the Randall cycle. You're doing other problems, glycation and all sorts of other issues. So there are other ramifications, but it's not the same as on a mixed diet where you're engaging the Randall cycle. That's a sort of slightly difference. But our bodies are basically in constant catabolic and anabolic states, and they pretty much are on a gradient of anabolism and catabolism, exactly like they are with the Randall cycle as well, and all these, because that's how systems work. They have variability. They're not in a constant state. It's due to reductionism thinking that we think in these very narrow ways. We want to put things into boxes, and it's really hard. People need to learn, if they want to understand physiology properly, they need to learn it from a systems approach. Not looking at the
too
past.
much going on. Yeah.
But you can still understand if you look at the system and look at what these different parts and how they're interacting. There are some general, and I've explained quite a bit in this video about some of those interactions. Obviously, I've done a lot of reading, but at the same time, it's not complicated stuff to learn either. I just find that it's a different way of thinking. And I think that's the reason. It's not that these people are dumb or can't learn this. It's they've learnt in such a way where they think differently, which is the problem. As I said, most people should do an engineering degree before they go and do any other science to learn a different way of analysing things.
Yeah.
Because one thing, you better get it right if you're building a bridge, because it'll fall down and kill people.
Yes, you have like the mass balance model, which I kind of explain. It's effectively like mass in, mass out, kind of. Use them to approximate protein, fat. I found that the protein amount tends to stay about the same for most people, except if they're trying to really reduce fat fast and want to do it whilst not feeling super hungry, then I'll increase the protein quite a bit more. But the fat will end up going down. The problem is, like what she said about the calories working every time, is that you have to
the hormones
undershoot.
will do some of the other, the hormones will do this, but the hormones would be doing some of the other thing, and you won't tank your metabolic rate either.
The leptin.
Because you've got, well, what you've got is you've got fat coming out and providing the same level of substrate that you would get. You're not reducing. It's just not coming through the mouth. It's coming from the gut.
Yeah.
Well, sorry, I mean, around the gut, area. That's where it's coming. And so that's why I think that whole model is very problematic, because what you really need to say to people is, we need to play around with this. Now, let's say somebody actually gets into a plateau. What does that mean? That could mean that they've got a problem with their mitochondria.
Or they're still eating loads of carbs.
As well.
Or they're binge eating because they're not satiated.
Yeah, exactly. There could be that as well. There could be a whole lot of things. But let's say they're keeping it completely and utterly clean and they've got a problem with their mitochondria. Well, the thing is, if they're not getting enough, then, there's going to be that issue. So, and they may not be as efficient in utilising fat, because again of the issues within the mitochondria. So there can be a lot of issues, but at the same time, as you said, people can basically can binge as well, and sort of derange that whole process. There's a lot of things.
I think focus on food, not numbers. Like, okay, this is,
Exactly.
300 grams of meat. Okay, fine. That's a number. But that's a definitive number. That 300 grams of meat will always be 300 grams of meat until you eat it. And eventually it goes through you. The other thing you also account for is the fact that people often have to undershoot the calorie intake they have by so much just to be sure that they're losing fat. But what they're really doing is just like you said earlier, they're lowering the mass input into their body. Therefore, they're changing the nutrition that's going in. So therefore, the fat has to eventually yield itself from your body fat to be used as a substrate. Then, of course, there's the carbohydrate insulin model.
But the amount of mass used in the mitochondria, but the amount of mass used in the mitochondria is the same, but it's just coming from a different source. You're getting it from a different source. So to claim the only time you're going to create a true deficit is if it's a carb-centric, and then you're going to lower your metabolic rate. Because the body's going to go, there's not enough energy substrates to cover that. And that's what happens in The Biggest Loser. And then they lose, they end up, oxidizing, end up breaking down their protein structures, their muscles. And they end up with, because your muscle is your metabolic rate, more or less. That's where most of, if you have less muscle tissue, that then you'd be utilizing less carbohydrate or fatty acids because there are less cells to use that. If you've got more muscle cells in your body, you've got more more of the mitochondrial factories to utilize that stuff. And so that's a high metabolic rate. A high requirement is to keep that all that tissue going. And it's the same reason if you run out, like that guy, the so-called insulin suppression, you run out of a number as you're too lean, you don't have enough body fat, and you're not taking in enough fat, you're obviously going to end up consuming the protein that you're taking or your muscles. That's starvation. That's what happened to people. He just avoids starvation and just basically provides a different substrate, which is basically protein, and certain of the gluconeogenic markers and some of the other markers go up, indicating that pretty much that is what is happening. So it's just wild that then they can actually, and this is the reductionist thinking, because it's obvious to me that that's what's happening. But for Rob, it's not. It's, this person is insulin suppressed. Again, because he's got a reductionist mindset. It's not that this person is basically too lean and not eating enough fat. Simple as that. It's just, the mindset is just, what can I say?
Yeah, I think a lot of time people are trying to force the body, aren't they? Forcing the body is not a great idea, But it's why I say to anyone, like, if someone approached me like, I want to compete next year. Okay, what's your start point? Okay, it's, say if it's a male and it's 30-40% body fat, I'd say, well, maybe not, because you'll probably be really, really toxic and suffer a lot to get that lean that fast. So I might say do it over a longer period of time. And if someone comes to me, they're 10-15% body fat, go for it. But, being that lean is hard. So I'm going to tell them, like, your body will fight you. It will fight you.
It will. Yeah. Once you get to those sort of levels, and that's why they can only do it and sustain it for a very short amount of time. But it's a false body image, and it's a very unhealthy one. If you're going to be at those low levels. Fine if you're doing competition, but people like yourself, Jonathan, understand that you need to basically put back a bit more fat, build up a bit the actual the fat mass around your body in order to get your hormones to function again properly and everything else. after competition. And then you won't go into these binge crazes like all these other people go and end up becoming extremely muscular fat, and then they can't even breathe properly. Some of them, So it's problematic, and it's putting people at risk. And that's why we are critical of some of this thinking, because as long as people think in those terms, they can, how can I put it? They can delude themselves and justify things to themselves, like people have been doing for a very long time. But once you actually explain it as a mass, and you say, you've got this amount of tissue, you need this amount of mass of protein in order to sustain that tissue, you need this amount of energy to keep that body functional at an optimal level. And if you need to if you want to reduce some of part of that tissue, you need to do this. That to me makes more sense. And I think it makes more sense to people. I think calories are far more confusing to people. And it's really a good, I'm not going to claim that it's they're doing it for that reason, but it's really like a good business model to basically, I'm the calorie counting specialist that can tell you exactly how you can get your results. It's disingenuous, because it actually, it teaches you a mindset of viewing
it's all the same. All the number means the same
in a false way. It is, and your recent video actually just showed how wrong that is, because isocaloric, different foods, completely different mass. The animal foods had less mass. The other ones, to get the same level of calories, you had to have far more mass. As a consequence, people are going to be putting more mass. When you put more mass into a system, what's going to happen? When you increase the volume of something, you're increasing the volume. You're making it bigger. If I put a couple of 4 ice cubes into a bucket, that water's going to expand. If I put only one, so that it's the mass that I'm putting in to that container. That's what it is. Physics has not ceased to exist. When you're talking about a volume of anything, we have a volume of human flesh. That volume has a certain amount of mass. There is no way something which is completely massless is going to make any difference. It's just a mass of food that is going to, and I'm either going to utilize, or most of it, and how much I utilize will depend on my physical activity that I oxidize in the mitochondria, or I store away. Because even fat, when it actually comes through, it actually goes to the fat cells as well. It actually parks stuff to the fat cells. When you're fed, chylomicrons come in every 10 minutes if you're in a healthy state from the intestines and float around. They've got fat soluble vitamins, they've got all sorts of things in them, but they pretty much have a lot of fat. They'll move it around, and eventually they'll go and actually park some in the fat cells, and then go to the trucks, drive my chylomicron truck, blue truck, to the actual liver, offload, and then the red truck leaves the liver, which is VLDL, and then ends up as LDL, which is the other truck system that comes from the liver. But it's just moving around. It's just all these lipids moving around, energy substrates, in terms of fat. Now, as far as I'm concerned, when I'm not eating the in-between meals, because insulin is not that high on a species appropriate diet, the body goes, well, he's not eating at the moment, so where are we going to get? Let's head for the fat cells and grab some fat and deliver that. And that's what happens. But if you've got higher insulin for whatever reason, and sometimes people can have plateaus, they can have, like derangements. People don't realize that, hydrocarbons, so you walk on a street, the hydrocarbons that you ingest can have an effect on your insulin signaling. Different effects depending on your genetics, varied. So some people can have very little or none, and some people can have quite a bit of an insulin spike. Guess what happens? They've just locked out fat. What next? They're going to feeling hungry. So automatically, that person could end up plateauing out, feeling hungry and plateauing out. And I find some people on the low carb diets, and I go, what's your activity level? Are you exposed to mold? Because some people mold can actually also have signaling of insulin as well. What are your exposures? And then I go, okay, these are the drivers. So it's not just the diet, it's environmental stuff as well that can have an effect on your endocrine system and can derange things. That's why you need someone to actually ask you questions and ask you about your lifestyle and, what's the environment. Have you recently changed your job? I've plateaued out. I was losing weight quite well. I recently changed my job. Okay, what's your environment like? Do a bit of an investigation, and sometimes you find the culprit. It's not necessarily always the diet. So it can be a lot of different things in that regard, from genetics, predisposition, genetic vulnerabilities to all sorts of things. So I'm concerned that the very calorie-centric approach sort of excludes all these other parameters. And it doesn't sort of really honestly deal with the person and all their issues and stuff like that. And that's an important aspect.
Yeah, it's interesting. We pick up data and anecdotes over time. I find generally speaking, people tend to get the fat loss results they want, providing they just reduce the fat intake. Sometimes you tweak things around a little bit. Sometimes it's activity, sometimes it's environmental. Then when they plateau, I look at a little bit further, and oftentimes it's just they're eating, a few extra sweeteners here and there. That's increasing insulin. So that means the propensity to store fat will go up slightly. When you find out, I'm having 10 cups of coffee a day with a dash of cream, there we go. That wasn't in your plan, was it? So.
Exactly. Yeah. Where I, for instance, when I don't want to, because I'll do little bouts because of deuterium. I consumed a lot of deuterium-rich stuff, and I've got a lot of accumulated deuterium that I go through small little stages of doing a bit of fat loss and then back into, and cream is my go-to to maintain and dilute my fat cells over time. So I'm not doing too much, because it's very hard when you do a lot of damage to your mitochondria to try and repair them, I can tell you. And so these are the other things that people don't realise and can actually cause problems to people. Some can die from cancer, it's called, when you do a lot of mitochondrial damage. So for me, it's really important to, protect myself. I don't want to be an attractive corpse, so to speak. And I pretty much use cream in my coffee for that specific reason, to dilute my fat cells, and so sort of keeping myself weight stable. And slowly, I've got another 2 years, so I'm doing little bits, lowering. That's deliberate. I could go really fast, but there are risks. So, as I said, it's really easy to lose weight, guys. Absolutely easy to lose weight if you know what you're doing. I just stripped off within 6 months, like well over 15 kilos. It was about 18 or 20 all up, but part of that was water weight. But in terms of fat, I had a big pot belly popping out here. It's no longer. But I'm not trim. I do want to get shredded at some stage, and that's just vanity or whatever. I just want to do it for a short amount, just for a short amount of time. And that's my aim, to do it in 2 years' time. But at the moment, I'm just maintaining. I've been weight stable now for a couple of years, and that's deliberate to pretty much, and I have to use cream, like, because my insulin is not high enough. The only time possibly when I raise it is pretty much when I'm actually having more protein and stuff like that. But it's not going to be the whole day. And if I don't have the cream, I start losing weight or fat, and so I'm going to stop this and start taking in cream. So I buy regular cream and I use it for that purpose. And it's basically to maintain my weight in order to get the dilution happening. And so slowly, I'll do another small attempt, So, as I said, guys, it's important to prioritize your health. I know we get a lot of images, and this is why I'm telling you my story. We get a lot of images out there that people promote this sort of nonsense. And the reason why they promote it is simple, because, that body image sells. But the problem is that there are consequences if people have got underlying issues. Now, I consumed a lot of seed oils because I thought they were healthy. So from my 30s all the way into my from my mid-20s all the way into, I really ramped up because I sort of bought that, and probably I brought my mother's early death as well, because she cooked everything in seed oils. Dad used olive oil and said we were idiots. And I said, we'll outlive you. And yes, anyway, but he's nearly close to 90, quite robust. And here's me at 44 having cardiovascular disease. That I was deranged and very unhealthy. My face was pasty. I looked older back then than I look now. And that's more than a decade ago. It's because I did so much damage. And I was like, every night I cooked in seed oils, every night. Because I love fried stuff, And so I cooked everything, So I'd buy fish fingers and I'd cook them with potatoes, and I'd cook chicken sort of, in breadcrumb and all that sort of stuff. That's the sort of shit that I used to consume all the time, with some rice and, those sort of things. And that was pretty much my diet, that what I consumed for well over 20 years. As a consequence of that is I ended up being honest, having my chest ripped open at the age of 44 and having double bypass surgery. So, yeah, I was really weak. I really struggled. I didn't have the energy. I'd go up one flight of stairs and I would be pooped, stuffed. Just one flight of stairs. I'd be, this sort of thing. And now I jog from the ground floor of the basement up to the 9th floor. I mean, it's just night and day, the difference. So and I do that twice or three times in the day at work. So that's high intensity. And then back to my seat. So that's high intensity, heart rate goes up, comes down, I get up to the top. And initially I was, struggling. Now I get up to the top, I don't even feel pooped or anything, and walk down, it's like 4 minutes and I'm back to, I'm sitting at my chair, and it's like, what was that it? It's like, it's so, but that's the level of fitness that I've actually attained due to all the changes that I've made in the last decade in my life. So I've come a long way.
It's been worth it.
It is in that regard. But at the same time, I realised I felt like crap after I lost 15 kilos of fat and, a couple of kilos of water weight, nearly close to 20 odd. It was all up. But I felt like crap, absolutely like crap. And then once I got into the deuterium side at the time, I go, okay, this is what's happening. Okay, what do I need? I need 7 years to dilute that stuff and get it out of my system. And so I have to go slower if I want to survive long term with healthier mitochondria to live past 100 like my great grandfather. So I made a decision that I didn't want to be an attractive corpse. So that's what I'm saying to people. That your goal should be health. You know, if you want to become a coat hanger, fine. But your goal should be health. And so your body composition goals may have to be slowed down because you may be carrying. Now, probably most people didn't have the sort of extreme sort of poor diet that I had. Okay. And so probably have got far less, you know, had a bit of junk food, a bit of processed food here or there, and relatively weren't that bad off. So obviously, you know, I'm a bit more of an extreme case. You know, I was morbidly obese and stuff like that. And, you know, so, you know, the normal stuff, you know, double chin and all these sort of things where you look like absolute, like, really bad and struggle and,
Jump on the hut.
you know, and yeah, basically, that sort of stuff. And you realise how bad and how damaged and deranged you've been. I mean, I look at some of the old trousers and all that, and I go, "Hang on now," you know, it's like it comes out like that, you know, thing that, and you go, "Ooh, that looks big." So, yeah, in comparison to sort of the trousers now, so you can understand the difference. So there's been quite a bit lost, but at the same time, I've sort of slowed it down because of these reasons. As I said, it's not a race to the finish. You know, my long-term aim is to have good health. And so what I'm trying to say to people is don't make my initial mistakes, especially if you've been exposed to very high levels of deuterium. It's really important. Your health comes first, and it's a matter of managing that and slowly losing the fat weight and focusing on trying to maximize the healthy nutrition and getting some of the biohacks in there, like the melatonin, the blue light sort of stuff and all that, the light hygiene to improve melatonin, to be able to get better amount of mitochondrial repair. All these are important. If we don't do these things, we'll have more deleterious consequences down the track. And it's the reason why now we're seeing this increase in cancer, which is quite horrifying, that I'm seeing in younger and younger people. It's scary what's happening out there. But when you look at the amount of, you know, these kids are doing exactly what I did for 20 years, you know, where before that I was in Greece, I was eating a bit way healthier, then come back at about the age of 18, heading on to 19, and then slowly over 5 odd years, I've sort of drifted away from that Greek sort of diet into this really processed garbage, convenient diet, because that's really what it was. It was just all convenient foods that I was buying, and processed foods, and smoking, drinking excessively, doing everything wrong in that regard. So smoking, drinking, and eating crap. So I'm not surprised 2 decades later, Rob, having to undergo surgery, major surgery, that is. And there are risks with major surgery like that. And at the time when I was having this surgery, I was obese, So luckily at the time I had lost a bit of weight. I'd come down a bit. I wasn't as morbidly obese as I was initially. So I had my best friend. He started dragging me out of the house and trying to get me to exercise and try to actually move around, and would take me on the bike track and we'd walk a bit. Pretty much I shuffled my legs and he would drag me sometimes. Sometimes we had to stop, and you knew I was struggling, but he put up with it. We're still best of friends, so we're pretty close. I was there early today anyway, had a coffee with him. So so pretty much I was lucky to have those sort of friends. Well, his partner, she's the lady that I actually walk on the Saturday. So every Saturday we walk down to Salamanca because he's down there selling coffee. So we actually do the long walk, and then so we get a bit of walking in, and then we end up down there. So I mean, that's why he's my closest friend. He's like a brother because he stood by me and helped me. And then he's sort of the brother of his brother-in-law recently passed away. And the guy was quite wealthy, let me put it that way. And you can have a 6 or 7 million, can't take it with you. Let's put it that way. Yeah, and so he was comfortable, but he was morbidly obese, in a really bad state.
Yeah.
And he basically, his partner found him dead on the toilet. Had a heart attack, massive heart attack, 63 only. And so they needed 8 people to actually shift him.
Oh, geez. Yeah.
Exactly. He was a big boy.
Wow. Yeah.
He's sort of your height, so he's tall and big. So, yeah, he was, So, and it wasn't too long ago when I had a chat with him. So I thought he was going to come down to Hobart. But unfortunately, he fought with his addiction. His addiction in the end killed him. Yeah.
Happens to a lot of people. I knew someone that fell down the stairs and choked on their tongue because of their weight.
Yeah. I've heard stories like that. Not exactly that sort of, but stories along those sort of lines where they've done something and they've either tripped over or this or that, and they've had a heart attack or they've choked or struggled in that regard.
Yeah.
Choking is a very big thing because the narrowing here that happens, the growth of the actual tongue and all that, so it narrows the whole that whole area. As a consequence, your gas exchanges are a problem. Swallowing food is a problem. All this sort of stuff. So it's a higher risk of choking and stuff like that. Yeah, it's quite bad what's happening out there with a lot of people, and the problem is they're not aware, and now we've got a food environment where there's a big push for even more processed food. I mean, like converting most of the actual healthy foods, the animal foods, dairy and meats, into all this processed garbage, all the fake meats and fake dairy that's out there. It's just growing all the time. At the moment, there's not a lot of traction in the majority of the population, but I remind people that you may not find it in the middle-aged and the older-aged people because they really want the real genuine thing. But amongst the younger kids that have been brainwashed and there's a lot of virtual signaling and all that, they are the ones that are adopting a lot of this sort of stuff at a very high rate. So it's getting up to 25-30% in some countries, where in the older age brackets, it's like, maybe 2 or 3%.
Yeah, I was at Tilly's book show and tell day the other day. It was like half an hour in the classroom looking at what she did in school. And Sophie's booked in to do a festive volunteering thing at the stall, basically, to, sell something. And the teacher was like, if you have any sort of recyclables, like something we could reuse to do modelling with junk or something, like plastic bottles, cartons. I was like, well, I get through 1,000 eggs every few weeks, probably. So would you like the cartons of eggs for that? And she's like, yeah, sure. Why'd you get through so many? And I said, that's one of the only foods I eat, so it's easy to get through so many. And she made me well aware of the proper balanced diet, and I was like, oh, well, thanks for letting me know. I didn't really think about that. I was being sarcastic, but you know. Yeah, but that's what they're taught. That's what they believe is optimal. That's just what they think. So
pretty much.
Yeah.
Well, you know, that's been the mantra for so long that people are completely sort of fixated on that. And I always remind people, you know, the old geezer with the 25 eggs on average a day for multiple decades, and outlived his parents. And his dad passed away at the age of 40, his mum at 76. And, you know, he was 88 at the time, wasn't taking any medication in. The only thing that he was, because his missus had passed away and he was lonely. So he was a bit depressed because his missus passed away. But otherwise, he had an addiction to eggs. And just all they do is the staff in the nursing home would just boil up 24 to 30 eggs, so on average 25 eggs a day. So, and pretty much he just snacked on those all day. That was his snack. So I don't know what other foods he was eating. No idea. They were just focused on the eggs.
That many eggs.
No, I don't think so. He probably may have had a bit, you know, because we're talking about now, it was 91. So back in 91, it was just the early beginnings of the low-fat craze. And that's why they investigated him as a case study, because they go, well, you're an outlier. What the hell's going on here? Because the theory says, or the indoctrination says, you should be dropping dead with so much cholesterol going into your system. And he sort of had, like, I think it was 3 point something millimoles, or, you know, and his lowest count and one of his others count was slightly higher in the 5 something. But he wasn't like excessive, you know, like in the 6, 7 or whatever, these really high numbers. Because he probably was not a hyper responder, a bit like me. Mine, you know, even when I went in for surgery and even later, now that I go and I've actually done tests, I never get these high numbers because I'm not a hyper responder. Again, I'm an ApoE 3.3. I'm not an ApoE 4. Like, you know, because anybody who's a 4, 4.3 or 4.2, they tend to be more prone to be hyper responders in that regard. Like Dave Feldman, he's a 4.3. So they tend to be hyper responders. They do have better immune adaptations. You know, higher LDL-C is actually good for the immune system. So they can actually cope better. But the ApoE 3 and 2 are more suited to basically if you're on a mixed diet or carbohydrate-centric diet, because it just means that the chylomicrons don't get uptaken in the liver as fast, which means it gives you enough time to process the glucose without actually shoving a lot of sugar and fat at the same time and causing random cycle activation in a, you know, substantial way in the liver. Doesn't happen. It happens at a very lower gradient. And that's why liver inflammation and also brain inflammation is much higher in people with an ApoE of 4. Or 4.4 in particular, but 4.3 and 4.2. And tend to also be hyper responders because they uptake this stuff so rapidly, they engage that sort of random cycle, so they convert more of that substrate into fat and then they're re-exported out as VLDL. They have higher trigs, and as a consequence, they end up with more LDL-C. So that's the sort of hyper responder sort of model. And he's one of them. And many other people that are unaware of that, why they are. And obviously, if you're doing a low-carb diet, and you're going to be exporting, because you're going to be taking chylomicron up remnant really rapidly into your system, where I will have my chylomicron circulating for longer in the system, which means I'll be producing less VLDL, less LDLC. And people with a 2-2, they will even be slower, like a couple of hours, until they uptake a lot of this sort of stuff, which is a consequence of that is their LDLC is going to be much lower as well. So it's going to be, some of these people can actually get LDLCs or total what they call cholesterol in below the 3s in some cases. And it's just pretty much the amount of circulating fat, cholesterol, and all that you've taken in your diet is still the same. It's just in different trucks that are not being measured. That's all it is. You're measuring just one type of truck, and because it's not going into the depot, which is the liver, because it's got a different key and it just can't get in there very easily, very quickly. There's just less docking stations. It means it stays in the bloodstream as one sort of vehicle. It doesn't go in there to offload to another vehicle. That's the only difference. It's an energy management system, and that's to protect, because in those interglacial periods, 200,000 years and 80, what was it, the other one, 80,000 years ago, approximately, believed in the 2 interglacial periods, we probably consumed a bit more carbohydrate in those. And as a consequence, we, as a protective mechanism, we changed those genes so we would slow down the uptake. So that's the what has changed in that regard, and that was only for that small, but that was for small amounts of carbohydrates. That adjustment happened. So we all will engage the Randall cycle. We'll all get quite deranged at the levels that we're doing nowadays, because that was for a much lower threshold. So I just need to clarify that for people that may think, our interglacial ancestors were not guzzling stuff down, because most of the stuff was very fibrous and not, there wasn't much. It was seasonal and fibrous, and you can actually see the HUDs with some of the actual little, it'll fit in your hand. It's little tubers like that, and they'll cut them open, cook them, and they suck out the glucose out of it, but it's all fibrous, very little in it. It's the same thing with the actual watermelons. In Africa, the original, it actually fits in your hand like a little ball, and they cut it open. It's just all fibrous and full of seeds. There's not much. They just suck out some of the actual sweetness, and that's about it, and they throw it away. They get very little. So it's like a treat. What we've produced now is domestication, and we've just put it on steroids. That's a different thing, and people sort of seem to conflate, and think that is the normal, and they say, well, we've been eating this for a very long time. No, it's all domesticated, all man-made. It's not natural. In a naturalistic environment, you wouldn't find this stuff. So, that's why your systems work in a certain way, and once you get over the threshold of the tolerance, we all end up engaging the Randall cycle. We all end up causing inflammation. We all start storing body fat at a much faster rate. That's everyone's experience. The minor nuancing and stuff like that is exposures, environmental, which we spoke to earlier, or other things which have to do with those slight variations. But that's about it, guys. It's not as if it's a massive difference. These too much sugar is deleterious to us. Simple as that. And people are trying to play around with the construct of calories and all sorts of things to try and justify it, or I feel better, and let's ignore any other ramifications or drivers why you feel better. You end up basically promoting a lot of them. I see shift into this sort of like light repeat model, which tends to be lean meats and fruit. And you've probably seen quite a few people in your sort of profession as well go that way.
I had one guy, he stated that he was a carnivore bodybuilder, and he was drinking weight gainer powder, which is like maltodextrin. And I worked it out by macronutrient, and the biggest macronutrient he was taking in was carbohydrate. And I was like,
yeah,
I don't think you're a carnivore, mate. Like, no matter how you frame it, you know.
Yeah, look, a lot of them don't even realise until you actually call them out and actually say, well, let's measure it. And then when you do it, you go, oh, do you realise the numbers? Even they are sometimes shocked because even they don't realise the amount that they're putting in. So here's again the actual, and that's the problem with the actual calorie model as well, of the inaccuracies, because once you actually go for the actual mass and look exactly what the mass is and going in there, you immediately think, oh, because a lot of people are just not doing the calculations, especially when they go, and this is the other thing with the calorie model, because they go, oh, I'm just having a bit of sugar. Fat's has far more calories. And so in their own minds are saying, well, if I was having that amount of fat, yeah, but I'm just having sugar, which has only got 4 calories, you know. So that's how they justify. They don't even realize, even when it comes to fat, let me just bust their bubble on this one. For the other reasons why calories are inaccurate. PUFA, but omega-6 PUFA in particular, has about 9.1 calories. So if you put it in a bomb calorimeter, that's what you're going to get. If you take DHA or EPA and put it in a bomb calorimeter, you'll get 9.3. If you take cocoa fat, which is primarily saturated, you'll get 5.5 calories, nearly half. So you think the calorie model is actually accurate when we're going to cocoa butter and it's actually highly saturated and it's 5.5? Because of the carbon and yeah, because of the different, the composition. Yeah, that's precisely it. And so what is it based? Because the key things that people have been consuming is carbohydrates and oils, and that's what the measurement was based on. It wasn't based on proper science. So even the calorie side is wrong just from that basis. And then when you take into consideration stearic acid and palmitate, which can actually induce signaling of reverse electron transport in, so what it does is it actually forces back electrons through complex 1, creates a small amount of reactive oxygen species to signal to the mitochondria that there's quite a lot of substrate, the fat. Omega-6s don't do that. They can't do a reverse electron transport. And MUFAs, which is primarily what you find like oleic acid, which is the stuff in the olive oil, does it to some extent, but not as much. And what does that reverse electron transport signaling do? It actually tells the cell, we need to biogenesis more mitochondria to increase the mitochondrial density. So on a species-appropriate diet, and especially dairy, you're going to get a ramping up of signaling for mitochondrial biogenesis, which means that you're going to be a hell of a lot more efficient in utilizing fat. That's what you're going to be doing. And that's an advantage. So there's a substantial difference between eating a species-appropriate diet and getting that effect at the mitochondrial level compared to eating seed oils, which has got more calories, but has less of that effect, which means you end up on the same so-called calorie, you end up basically storing more away. Completely different effect. just because at that level. So even at that level of the mitochondria, the way they respond to different substrates of fat. So how can it be accurate, the model? It's wrong in the way that it responds at where energy is produced. And two, it's actually wrong in the amount of calories that it calculates depending on the type of fat it is. So it's more saturated, it's got less calories. So, I mean, it's nearly half. How can it be an accurate model, Rob? How can it be an accurate model, mate?
It's like the in and out side of it are both wrong. It's not just, okay, we're not a bomb calorie. It's also what you're putting in.
Yeah.
It's a completely different outcome,
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, even protein is really about 4.44, something like that. You know, they round it off to 4 to make it easy. There's all these rounding off things just to make it easy. And the most popular fat that people take in is seed oils, so they round it off to 9. It's really that what it is. It's junk science. It's junk measurement systems. But it's been pushed so long. There's so many tools that have been created, all these online tools and all that. There's a whole industry, a whole cottage industry that's actually been created around it. And if you criticize it, like we're doing here and actually pointing out all the fallacious elements to it, we're called crackpots. And we're actually providing science information in that regard that anybody can find if they look at the literature. Obviously, we don't have the time to go right through all this sort of stuff. I will be making future videos for reverse electron transport for a lot of this sort of stuff that I'm saying. But, you know, it is out there. Anybody can find it and discover it. It's not as if it's hidden, you know, in some vault that nobody knows where it is. It's on PubMed, a lot of the research and studies. It's just a matter of people going and checking and learning and getting the information. The problem is a lot of these people have come out of academia, which is rigid. It's, as Bart calls it, it's indoctrination.
Yeah.
And people just accept as given some of these facts. They never go back and do a back check.
Yeah.
And that's why they end up with the conclusions they make and the opinions that they have.
The interesting thing is, for me, touching on the point of like indoctrination. So Dr. Sarah Zaldivar released a video quite a long time ago. I can't remember which one it was, but she sort of said, you know, I got my, I think, PhD in exercise physiology, I think, and I think a bachelor's degree in nutrition, or dietetics, sorry. And she was very much against the dietetic association, you know, with the, you know, red meat is bad, it causes cancer, this, that, and the other. She said, I'm not behind that. And I did my degree, but I don't agree with the principles of what they said and what they taught me. I don't see how it's such a big stretch just to say, okay, maybe the calorie model is just a load of pants. You know, if it doesn't work out scientifically, how can she propose that's a good methodology? And I honestly cannot agree with the fact that she said, cannot agree with the stance that it works every time, because I have not seen it work every time. How is it I can diet on a mixed macronutrient diet of 2,600 calories to get into shape? When I'm carnivore, I can eat 3,600 plus at my lowest point. It doesn't compute.
No, it doesn't. It's because it works different. And the, you know, there is a substantial difference between different fatty acids, the way they operate. It's not only the difference between beta oxidation and, you know, glycolysis. There's also a difference in, you know, the byproducts that come out of that. If you're eating more meat, you're getting in more taurine. What's that going to do? That's going to inhibit lactate, going back through the Cori cycle. So you're going to have an effect on that type of the way the mitochondria work the way metabolism is working in your body. So where is it the same? Just by eating certain things that may have certain components, other elements in there, they can have a profound effect how even energy is utilized. Let alone if we take in some of the other protein substrates and whatever else, the variability in that. I mean, lysine and leucine are the key, both ketogenic in that regard. Some of the other ones, like tryptophan, are both, things like that, a few of the others. But so people think, well, do you mean I can actually ramp up ketosis taking leucine? Yeah, you can. Whatever is not used for protein synthesis, it will be used, This is why people were doing, like, fasting ketosis, what I call a dirty fast. And they were taking leucine. They were still building muscle mass while they were shredding really rapidly. So they were maintaining their muscle mass, and they were shredding rapidly. Now, I don't recommend that is a good, because it puts your endocrine system in the toilet, and it's problematic from the thyroid point of view if you do it too long and stuff like that. We're just talking about here in terms of scientific literature, what happens when you do certain things. And so that's why when people say, I can lose weight, and I can stop a plateau and all that, and I can say, I can do even more rapidly if I really want to. But is it healthy? So, that's not the argument. I like to discuss things with people, get a bit of their history, understand where they're coming from, what they've been exposed to and all that, because my sort of approach is do no harm and say, look, you need to take it slower. Or you can actually, you're fine, you can go full blast, eat a steak, you'll do fine, you're young, you're pretty healthy, not many problems. So depending on the situation, but this is what a lot of these people seem to, they seem to miss, because of, even though she says she sort of rejects her education, she's still, the indoctrination, as I spoke to Bart once, because he knows a number of people who are in the low carb community that have gone through the same indoctrination, and he's noticed that, they're still inflexible about a lot of things, because, they may go, carbs are a problem, and seed oils are a problem, they're toxic, because they learn a few things on the side, and, meat's not a big problem and all that, but then there's a lot of other parts of the curriculum that they still accept. And she's quite clear. I can see that she's quite vocal about her views on pretty much the calorie model. So she thinks that it has some weaknesses and some imperfections, but generally it's not a bad model to use. And I go, no, it's got a lot of issues and a lot of problems, and it doesn't work. And it causes a lot of people a lot of hassle and problems and stuff like that. And you actually have the same experience with your client. It does. It's a bad model. It's just a bad model. Trying to explain things it's like using, very poor information to describe something, or how to get from point A to point B, and really providing really poor information. Half the people may not make it to point B because they may go down the wrong track and get lost or whatever, because it's so poor, the information. And that's the problem, the analogy that I give. So if it's not robust and it's not something that actually has good utility, you end up in a mess. My sort of view is, I will rather, even though for a couch potato, somebody who doesn't really do much and all that, a sort of a 1-to-1 protein to fat ratio, or a 1.2 in fat to 0.8 ratio in protein. For women, need a bit more fat than men, I'm fine with that for people that are sedentary. But the moment people are physically active and all that, I'm going to focus on what are your protein needs and what is basically your fat needs for better oxidation. That's what I'm going to be concerned, and we're going to play around with those until we get them right, and you get what you're targeting, what your goal is, and that's really how one should operate. Now, I give general information in that regard. If you really want to, you should consult with Jonathan, because he's got programs and all that. I've got a day job. I don't have the time. So I just provide sort of a general outline for people. If you really want to target specific goals in terms of body composition, or to, in terms of any type of competition related stuff, go and see a person like Jonathan for some general physiology information and knowledge and all that. People that may have an interest, they want to go one step further to understanding a bit more deeper physiology and stuff like that, go and see Bart. He's got a number of courses and training courses on his Patreon site and a few other things that he's got, which goes into, physiology, biochemistry. It's actually proper, you could say, stuff that a lecturer or teacher would teach. So if people want to learn and learn it the right way, not all the nonsense that's out there, the reductionist nonsense, but actually get proper understanding of, how the muscle energetics and how Randall cycle works, all these sort of things. There's a lot of videos that he's got, and he covers a whole lot of other subject matters in terms of academic level of physiology and biochemistry. People should go and subscribe, or become a Patreon supporter of his. He's got all his links on his website, and get that information. So there are good resources, people that can utilise in our community, but there are also ones that are problematic, which are using this traditional model that is being used in the carb-centric world and has been a complete and utter failure and disaster for most people. And now, unfortunately, people are trying to resurrect, keep it going, and trying to sort of push it in the actual carnivore space, in the low-carb space. And anybody that disagrees with them, they're basically, we're too either fanatical, or we're too
pedantic
or hardliners or whatever, or we're basically autistically challenged or whatever.
I think it's great being autistic. How many people out there can sit on a live stream with Harry for 4 hours? It's excellent.
That's it.
I get to take in all this information. It's brilliant.
Yeah. Well, exactly. You enjoy it, and so you got to have that sort of mind, as you said, and it's probably. I know Bart's actually had long sessions with me as well. So for sort of reason, everybody else wants short, like half an hour or 20 minutes. They just, So I actually enjoy having chats with you, and I enjoy having chats occasionally. Had more in the past with Bart. He doesn't do a lot of interviews nowadays. He does a lot of. He'll come on, like you've had him on your channel. I've had him on my channel. He'll come on to other channels, but he's just sort of more caught up in just doing his little videos that he does. He enjoys that without complicating his life too much nowadays, and it works for him, which is fine. I do miss a bit but then I started my channel. He used to do those long streams as well, which he's always criticised me of doing long streams. He goes, I can't believe how Harry does. I think I did one. The longest one was about 7 hours. That was a long. And he goes, I can't believe it, all that. And he tells Pim and all that sort of stuff. And then after that, he does he starts doing these long streams where he invites a whole lot of panel and people on that and does the same thing. I go, okay, the goose and the gander type thing. So anyway, that was funny.
Yeah, we'll leave it on a good note then. We'll end the recording.
We definitely will.
Yeah. Well, thanks very much for coming on. Appreciate your time. Appreciate it's probably gone past midnight now where you are. So it's been great having you on.
Yeah, 12:10, 10 minutes past 12. So yes, it is.
I'll link all your stuff below. All the links will be below as well. I'll put timestamps after this video premieres as well, so you guys can see everything was set up to a point. I'll probably put it on one block so you can actually zoom through and find out what information you need at the given time. So thanks very much.
Appreciate it.
Build muscle and lose fat on the carnivore diet.